Terrence Bray, a janitor at the nation's top tech university, notices a glaring error in a professor's AI prototype. Before he can speak, the professor sneers, "Go fetch coffee, you're no scientist." Laughter erupts across the lecture hall, crushing Terrence in front of everyone. But behind the mop closet, Terrence hides something no one expects, a secret that could expose the professor's entire career. The question lingers, will he strike back, or be erased forever? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning haze hovered like thin silk over the campus of Denton Tech University, turning the spires of glass and steel into pale, shimmering ghosts. Students pressed between the buildings in neat clusters, hoodies, backpacks, coffee cups clutched in swift hands, earbuds humming with ambition. Professors strode across lawns, clipboards in hand, their footsteps tapping on the pavement like measured beats before a grand reveal. Among them moved a quieter rhythm, the steady squeak of Terrence Bray's worn sneakers, the soft glug of water in his mop bucket, the muted scrape of a mop sweeping across polished stone. No one turned to notice. No one cared to see more than a janitor at work. Terrence's custodial uniform fit him like a second skin. The faded brown fabric, stitched with his name tag, T. Bray, had belonged to him for nearly a decade, rusted from bleach, frayed at the sleeves from too many scrubs, the letters half-worn from repeated wash cycles. He wheeled his cart slowly down the east corridor of Carson Hall, each step careful, precise. To the rushing students and preoccupied professors, he blended into the background, a fixture of the building, not of the intellect that pulsed inside those walls. Yet inside his mind was alive with patterns, equations, algorithms, all dancing behind tired eyes. He paused just outside room 3B. Muffled voices rose and fell behind its heavy oak door. A seminar on machine learning, or perhaps a lecture on predictive modeling, or one of the weekly tech think talks that always ended with applause and self-congratulation. The star of the show was Dr. Paul Maddox, the man whose theories were already being whispered in industry circles, and who wore confidence like a tailored suit. Terrence had heard enough of his lectures, bits and pieces, snatches of sentences as he passed in the halls. Today the words hit him like flickers of light in a dark room. The loss function converges when the input weights are normalized. Without that step, your bias-variance ratio goes haywire. The voice, loud and measured, carried through the door. Terrence recognized the concept instantly. He had worked out the same normalization logic months ago in his basement, scribbling code in the margins of repair orders, running simulations in his head as he scrubbed lecture hall floors. He hesitated, mop in hand, as his fingers paused on the cold metal handle. A question formed too sharp, too precise for someone in his position to ask. Still, something inside him stirred, not pride, but need, the need to be seen. He wheeled his cart into the hallway. The door to 3B loomed like a barrier. He hadn't entered lectures in more than 10 years, not since the incident. The polite smile, the polite rejection, the polite turning away, but that was then. The man beside the mop bucket had changed. He had watched, learned, built. Remnants of notebooks filled with neural net sketches, half-finished chips made of salvaged parts, regression graphs plotted by hand on the outside of old cardboard boxes, all hidden beneath layers of dust, in a small basement apartment. But now he had clarity, he had resolve. He pushed open the door gently. The seminar room went still. Laptops froze, pens hovered above notebooks. Eyes flicked, some curious, some amused. The students exchanged glances. Hearing a mop bucket outside was normal. Hearing it roll inside was not. Professors rarely tolerated interruptions from people without titles. They tolerated cleaning staff only outside class hours. "Excuse me," Terrence said, voice low, calm. A janitor's voice. A voice they had trained themselves not to hear. But it was his voice, and today it stepped into their attention.
Dr. Maddox paused mid-sentence.
His polished tone wavered for the briefest moment before regaining composure. "Yes?" he asked, cool, with the same polite detachment one uses to address maintenance queries. The room tensed. Terrence lifted his mop, accidentally perhaps, but as he adjusted the handle he spoke again. "Your normalization layer, your missing dropout regularization. Without it your variance will spike. You'll overfit." A laugh rippled through the room, soft at first, uncertain, then louder. Several students closed laptops, smirks spreading across their faces. Whispers darted like mosquitoes. Maddox's lip curled, amusement tainting his scholarly arrogance. Did the janitor just critique my model? Maddox leaned back, folding his arms. What's your name again? He asked in his clipped tone. T. Bray? The T sounded like a joke about a cleaning man. Tell me, Miss Bray, he said, voice slow and mocking. What makes you think you know more than the people who've been coding neural nets since before you could write cleanly on a chalkboard? Terrence didn't flinch. He set the mop aside carefully, wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, even though the room was cold. He looked at the projection screen behind Maddox. Lines of poorly generalized code, tangled as ivy choking an old mansion. Because, he replied, voice soft but steady. I've seen how code fails when it isn't treated like a living thing. Without dropout, you're building castles on sand. It will collapse under noise. His words hung in the air, still as dust motes in a shaft of afternoon sunlight. Maddox scoffed. And you're a janitor, he said, each word sharp. You wipe floors. You don't run algorithms. Go fetch some coffee, Mr. Janitor. Leave the science to the scientists. That's when something broke inside Terrence. Not anger, not shame, but a quiet recognition. Everything he was, everything they thought he was, not just invisible, but intentionally unseen. A part of him, long kept silent under mop handles and cleaning carts, tightened into resolve. He didn't speak again. He didn't argue. He just turned, grabbed his mop bucket's handle with both hands, and walked out slowly, deliberately. The students watched in silence. Even Maddox hesitated for a second, eyes narrowing, as though he expected Terrence to crumble. But Terrence didn't crumble. He wheeled his cart out of the room. The slick floor reflected fluorescent lights overhead. The wheels left faint wet tracks. A trail behind him, quiet, almost unnoticed. But there, a mark left where he had stood, and a subtle disturbance in the polished order of the building. Students shuffled back to their seats. The professor cleared his throat and returned to the board, his voice louder than before, as if to scare off any further interruption. But the rhythm of the hallway was broken. Outside, Terrence paused. The corridor stretched before him in dull symmetry, closed doors, identical classroom numbers, silent trophy cases, filled with plaques honoring past scientific achievements. He leaned against the wall for a moment. His heart pounded, slow, deep. He closed his eyes, tasted the bitterness of humiliation, felt the weight of condescension pressing against him like gravity. He thought of the nights he'd spent in his shabby apartment, the dim bulbs swinging overhead, his fingers stained with ink, solder, late-night coffee, the nights his mind soared, building processor diagrams that no one would ever see, the nights he convinced himself that dreams don't need permission to breathe. A passing student bumped into him. Startled. The kid apologized quickly and moved on. Terrence nodded, but the gesture felt foreign. He realized something. In that moment, he didn't belong, not as part of their world, not as cleaning staff, not as intellectual. He belonged somewhere else entirely, somewhere built by him, for people like him, for ignored brilliance. He resumed his path toward the janitor's closet at the end of the hall, the mop bucket rattling gently. Each echo against the tile floor felt like a heartbeat. He cleaned a forgotten smudge on a window pane near the stairwell. He dusted off a row of empty chairs in a lecture room, whose day had ended. He sanitized a spill from an energetic chemistry class long gone. Everything mechanical, everything routine, until the moment wasn't routine anymore. At the bottom of the stairwell, the buzzer on his radio crackled softly. It was the night shift calling. A leak in Lab C, near the robotics wing. Normally trivial. But tonight, as he pushed the cart forward, his wrist brushed against the keychain hanging from his belt. Two small metal tags rattling softly, one labeled custodial, the other unreadable, scratched beyond recognition. For a split second he looked at them and felt the weight of each tag, one stamped by the university, the other carved in sweat and memory by him. He stepped into the dim utility basement, under Carson Hall. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, revealing cement walls stained by time, a faint smell of mildew, and shelves stacked with supplies, mops, detergents, floor polish, old lab gloves. Terrence's apartment was a floor above this basement. Many maintenance people used this place, but only he used the locked cabinet behind the rickety shelf, behind brooms and buckets, behind dusty floor wax cans. He pushed aside a mop and opened the cabinet door. Inside sat a laptop balanced on an old cardboard box, wiring spools, circuit boards salvaged from broken lab equipment, a half-built neural net board he had cobbled together from scrap. It looked fragile, wired like a cobweb, precarious like a house of cards. But to him it was art, and it was alive. He turned on the laptop. The screen flickered to life, code lines scrolling, numbers jumping, matrices balancing. Outside, the campus light faded. Inside, the basement glowed from the monitor's glare. Terrence leaned forward, hands shaking just slightly. Not from fear, but from momentum. Years of suppressed talent, politely dismissed, quietly hidden, everything funneled into this one machine. As he typed and adjusted code, his mind raced. He visualized layers of artificial neurons firing, filters calibrating, dropout regularization patterns forming like stained glass windows. He adjusted weights, tested hypotheses, ran simulations, every calculation precise, every prediction sharp. Hours slipped by, unnoticed. The rest of the world, lectures, cafeteria chatter, late-night lab cleaning, drifted away. There was only the screen, the code, the promise of something real, something unhinged from titles and uniforms. The hum of the cooling fan was the only soundtrack. The soft drip of a leaky pipe somewhere above overhead was a distant reminder that he was still in a basement, still cloaked in anonymity. But the lights on the motherboard blinking like heartbeat pulses told a different story. Finally, he paused. The clock on the laptop read 2:10 a.m. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the neural net's output, a predicted pattern of data that aligned almost perfectly with a recent complex dataset from the robotics wing's sensor logs. The model had not only converged, it had generalized. It had soared beyond the flawed model Dr. Maddox paraded around. And it had done more. It had foreseen anomalies in sensor noise that the lab had flagged only hours ago. Real-time results without real-time credit. His chest tightened. Hope and fear tangled together. Yet pride rose quietly, as gentle and dangerous as a silent revolution. He reached over, connected the board to a portable drive. Backups. Multiple. Time-stamped. He closed the laptop. He covered the device carefully with an old towel. He placed the components back inside the box, behind a stack of floor polish buckets, hidden from eyes that only expected cleaning supplies. He locked the cabinet. The key slipped back onto his belt. The tags jangled softly, as though mocking him. Custodial, unknown, both part of him, both imposed upon him. Terrence turned off the basement light. Darkness swallowed him, but not his resolve. The next morning, the halls of Denton Tech University would fill once more with energy, ideas, ambition. Professors would lecture, students would nod. The elevator doors would close with a sigh. The coffee machines would steam. The mops would squeak, and no one would notice a box tucked under a shelf in a dead-end basement closet. No one would remember the janitor who argued once, who dared to speak logic into arrogance. But Terrence would remember. And tonight he would begin building something the world couldn't ignore. As he stepped out onto the empty sidewalk outside Carson Hall, a cold wind brushed his face. He looked up at the dark sky, the stars hidden behind campus lights, the campus silent. For the first time in years, he felt an electric shiver, not from fear, but from promise. A promise that lines of code could speak louder than sneers, that genius could outlast prejudice, that silence could be broken by brilliance. He walked away from the building, mop bucket wheeling behind him. Just another janitor, just another night shift. But inside, a spark burned, somewhere deep in his basement. His model waited. And the world wasn't ready. As Terrence slid into his beat-up sedan to head home, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He ignored it, but the voicemail waiting in the inbox was titled simply, "We've been watching." The walk from Denton Tech University to Terrence Bray's apartment stretched less than a mile. But tonight it felt endless. The cold evening wind pressed against his cheeks, carrying with it the remnants of laughter from the lecture hall. Laughter that didn't belong to him. Laughter that wasn't meant to be harmless. Every step echoed the same words in the same sharp tone he couldn't shake. "Fetch coffee, you're no scientist." The sentence cut through him with the precision of a blade sharpened over decades, striking an old wound rather than creating a new one. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the pavement as Terrence kept walking, head lowered, his pulse caught in a tight rhythm. He replayed the moment again, the smug tilt of Dr. Maddox's mouth, the way students had leaned back and laughed, the bitter flick of humiliation that felt less like insult and more like inheritance. He tried to swallow the heaviness, but it sat in his mind like a stone. A group of students passed him on the sidewalk, loud and carefree. One of them glanced at Terrence, eyes flicking down to his uniform before sliding away, as if acknowledging him required effort. Another whispered something under their breath. Terrence didn't hear the words, but he recognized the tone. He always recognized the tone. He shifted his backpack a little higher on his shoulder. His steps remained slow, deliberate. He didn't want to go home carrying shame in his chest. But home was the only place where the truth of him could breathe. As he approached his small apartment complex, a building with peeling paint and an unreliable elevator, he felt the wind shift. It carried campus chatter even from a distance. Stories of tomorrow's research showcase, gossip about Maddox, excitement about upcoming internships. None of them knew a janitor had corrected their professor. None of them cared to know. He unlocked the front door quietly. The dim hallway smelled of old carpet and bleach. His apartment was on the ground floor, tucked into the corner where the lights always flickered. He stepped inside, gently closing the door behind him. The silence felt familiar, comforting even, but tonight it carried a pulse of something unsteady. He dropped his backpack on the small kitchen table and leaned both hands against the counter, breathing slowly. The insult replayed again, this time in Maddox's voice, then in a dozen older voices, ones that stretched farther back than Denton Tech. He stood up slowly and walked to the living room. It was sparse, one couch, one lamp, one small television. But behind the thin wall-facing curtain, hidden from casual eyes, was the place he always went on nights like this. He pushed the curtain aside. The entire wall behind it was covered in papers, equations, sketches of neural architectures, theoretical models, memory optimization experiments, microprocessor blueprints drawn with dull pencils and worn markers. Diagrams crawled across the wall like a constellation of ideas: denied funding, denied acknowledgement, denied existence. At the center hung 3 sheets, stamped rejection letters from patent offices. Insufficient documentation. Lacks degree verification. Not eligible under institutional criteria. Terrence stared at them for a long moment, the shame burning fresh. He ran his fingers over an equation he'd solved 3 years ago, one that Denton's graduate students were still debating in lectures. He squeezed his eyes shut as a tight ache formed in his throat. Not a scientist, he whispered, repeating the words so softly they seemed to disappear into the wallpaper. Not a scientist. The words didn't sting because they were new. They stung because they were old. His mind drifted back to high school, the one place he once believed brilliance could protect him. He'd won the state science fair twice. Teachers whispered that he was the kind of student who didn't come around often. But when the MIT recruiter visited his school, Terrence watched as the man shook hands with 2 white students first. Boys with lower scores, lower rankings, but higher expectations. Terrence remembered approaching the recruiter afterward, notebook in hand, ready to share the processor compression technique he'd designed from scrap metal. The recruiter's smile had faltered the moment he realized Terrence wasn't one of the boys waiting behind their parents. The man flipped through the notebook with polite indifference, offering a generic business card before walking away. MIT later rejected Terrence before he even completed the interview process. Application not advanced. No explanation. No feedback. He'd tried again 2 years later. Again. Nothing. Then came the wrongful arrest. A night he still tried not to think about. He was 20, walking home from a late-night job at a repair shop. Police stopped him, claiming he matched a description. He remembered the officer's eyes, flat, uninterested in explanation. He remembered the feeling of cold cuffs. He remembered sitting in a cell for 6 hours before someone finally admitted the real suspect had already been found. No apology. Just dismissal. Wrong place, wrong time, an officer had muttered. Wrong race was what he meant. Terrence's job prospects shrank after that. His record remained technically clean, but the arrest followed him like a stain. Interviews ended early. Opportunities slid past him like water on glass. He took custodial work because it was the only job that didn't question him. Not his education gaps, not his background, not his silence, but silence had its limits. Tonight, it felt suffocating. Terrence stepped back from the wall of equations and walked slowly toward the door to the basement, his sanctuary, his workshop of hidden brilliance. He placed his hand on the knob, but didn't turn it yet. A part of him hesitated, unsure if he was pushing himself toward hope or toward disappointment. A memory surfaced, one he rarely allowed himself to revisit. His mother years ago, sitting at the kitchen table with a cracked mug of tea, telling him softly, You don't get to quit, Terrence. Not when the world already expects it. She had passed away before ever seeing what he built. Before seeing what he could become. He pressed his forehead against the basement door and exhaled deeply. Not a scientist, he whispered again, but this time something inside him pushed back. A slow burn. A quiet ignition. He straightened his back, tightened his grip on the doorknob, and turned it. The basement air greeted him like an old friend. Cool, faintly metallic, carrying the smell of solder and machine dust. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its dim light swinging slightly as if sensing his arrival. He walked down the creaking steps one at a time, each step echoing those cruel words again. Fetch coffee. You're no scientist. You don't belong here. He reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. Against the far wall, partially hidden beneath an old sheet, sat the device. Compact, angular, wired with experimental circuitry, and humming ever so faintly though it wasn't powered on. A machine pieced together from years of rejected ideas, bought parts, salvaged components, and unbearable silence. It was the closest thing to a masterpiece Terrence had ever made. But it wasn't finished. It wasn't tested. And if he was wrong, even slightly wrong, turning it on could fry the core, overload the circuit, or worse, shatter the last piece of hope he had left. He felt the weight of the night settle around him, heavy and electric. No scientist, he repeated with a bitter whisper. We'll see about that. He reached forward and slowly peeled the sheet back, revealing the device entirely, its core glowing faintly in the dark, like something alive, restless, dangerous. As his fingers hovered over the power switch, Terrence's eyes widened, because the device was already warm. Someone had turned it on while he was gone. The upstairs lights of Terrence Bray's small apartment flickered as he climbed the narrow stairs, a low buzzing hum echoing through the walls. Every creak underfoot reminded him he was walking deeper into his own mind, a place not charted by degrees or diplomas, but by memory, by pain, and by ideas that never belonged to him. The moment he turned the basement doorknob, a faint electrical warmth brushed his finger. It pulsed quietly under his palm, like a heartbeat he thought he'd forgotten. He stepped down the stairs slowly, expecting emptiness, expecting darkness, but instead he found glow. The little DIY neural net board hummed softly, its data lights blinking with a rhythm he did not program to know. His breath caught. He stood frozen a second, listening. The faint hum of a cooling fan, the shiver of the bulb overhead swinging. Nothing moved, nothing spoke, yet the machine breathed. Memory flooded him, late-night soldering sessions, breadboard rewiring, experimental dropout layers coded by hand, weight initialization tweaks in the margins of housing invoices. Countless hours spent hidden. Every time the world said no, he had said nothing, and built anyway. He rounded the dusty work table slowly, eyes on the humming board, chest tightening. The door upstairs had stayed locked. His backpack was still in his room. This meant only one thing. Someone else had been here. A cold knot of fear coiled in his stomach. Not panic, but disbelief, violated curiosity, and cautious adrenaline. He crouched beside the machine. On the small monitor, a terminal cursor blinked, awaiting command. He reached out, hand trembling, and typed a simple line, status. The board responded instantly, memory logs scrolling, timestamps he didn't recognize, logs from earlier that night. The last entry, initiate sequence 2342. That was hours ago. His eyes widened. Who else knew? Who else had access? He shut eyes tight and let breath out slowly. Anger flared, sharp and bitter. But also something else, resolve. He couldn't let fear or theft silence him. Not again. Carefully, he shut the log viewer. Then he began. The fluorescent basement bulb flickered overhead. As he connected a portable hard drive to the machine, he transferred core files, weight matrices, dropout configurations, optimization parameters, anomaly detection routines. Every component of the model he'd built in secret. He closed his laptop gently, unplugged the board from power, then powered it back on, under his control. This time his control. The screen winked to life with soft clicks. He opened the main execution script. Time stretched as his fingers flew over the keys, each tap echoing in the stillness, each line of code a silent incantation of ambition and vindication. Outside, the world rested. Inside, data flowed. He adjusted learning rates, reinforced gradient clipping safeguards, configured regularization layers, and primed the network with frozen training data from lab sensors he'd collected over the past months. Data nobody valued, because it came from the janitor's report. Around midnight, the hum quieted. The cooling fan slowed. Terrence sat back in exhaustion, his spine aching, eyes bleary. Everything looked stable. He rubbed his temples, whispering to himself, no red flags, no overflow, no silent crash. He paused. He remembered the mocking laughter, how easily they had dismissed him. He allowed himself a bitter smirk, a whisper, not just a janitor. Then he hit the key. Run, test, analyze. The screen flickered. Matrices unfolded. Error logs disappeared. Predictions formed. Lines of output scrolled faster than he could read. The model not only converged, it generalized. The final output window displayed probabilities aligned impeccably with actual past anomalies, logged by the robotics wing. The model then produced a new result, a predicted anomaly, a spike in signal noise, at a sensor cluster in Robotics Lab C, scheduled 2 days later. It flagged 3 coordinates, probabilities above 9. Terrence's breath caught. The data window glowed green, silent but screaming. He looked around the dingy basement, at the peeling paint, at the dusty shelves, at the single bulb above. The world outside had no idea. But this machine, this piece of hidden brilliance, just saw something their labs would miss. A mix of exhilaration and fear bubbled in his chest, like magma just below the surface. He realized in that moment, if he shared this prediction, proved it, everything could change. But every change meant exposure. And exposure meant facing the same walls of skepticism, same sneers, same racist dismissal. A flash of lightning from outside cut across the basement window. A distant thunder rolled, as if the world was marking the moment. He leaned forward, fingers poised over the download log command. But then, a sound. A soft scrape. The bulb above flickered violently. The door upstairs creaked. He froze mid-breath. Heart pounding, he listened. There was another sound. Soft, distant footsteps. Not his own. He jerked his head toward the stairs. Panic rippled through his veins, sharp and fleeting. Whoever had turned the board on had not left, watching, maybe waiting, maybe thinking. He closed the screen, killed processes, unplugged the drives. He taped wires loosely, hidden under a folded sheet, thumbtacked lists of pseudocode and output logs, into a folder behind old floor wax cans. Everything silent again, everything still. Still, he could not ignore what the model said. The predicted anomaly, invisible to others, but invisible only until now. He pressed his forehead against the cold concrete wall, breathing hard. In the darkness, he whispered, "They can't ignore this." He gathered the folders, shut off the basement light, and climbed back upstairs by candle of memory and new resolve. Outside, rain began to patter softly on the roof, a quiet drumbeat like warning. In the pale glow of his single living room lamp, he placed the data folder on the kitchen table. His hands shook. That data, his data, was now evidence. Evidence that he wasn't just mopping floors, not just cleaning, not just invisible. That wall of equations he hid behind wasn't decoration. It was a map, a manifesto, a whisper of revolution. He sank onto the couch, staring at nothing and everything at once. Around him, the silence felt alive, as if the apartment itself was holding its breath. For the first time, the future seemed real, immediate, fragile, and terrifying. Darkness pressed in. The phone on the table buzzed softly, dragging him out of his reverie. He flinched. On the screen, an unknown number. A blank text. No message, just the number. He stared at it, stomach tightening. He knew better than to trust curiosity, but he also knew fear was the enemy of brilliance. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he picked up the phone, thumb hovering above the green button. His mind raced. Was it a threat, a trap, or the call that finally saw him for what he was? He closed his eyes. He pictured every rude laugh, every rejection letter, every force that ever told him, "You don't belong here." He pictured the glowing lines of a neural net that didn't ask permission. He pictured a chance to prove them all wrong. His finger pressed the call button. The phone clicked, but nothing happened. No voice, no sound. Then, silence. A message popped up. "We saw what you built. Are you ready to show us?" Terrence's breath hitched. He stared at the screen in disbelief. The room seemed to tilt. Rain tapped harder on the roof. The lights dimmed. The world waited. In that moment, he realized the machine was only the start. The echo of that insult. The humiliation in front of the lecture hall. The unseen nights of brilliance. All of it was leading here. He exhaled slowly, tightening his grip on the phone. Heart pounding, mind racing. He opened the data folder again and looked at the printed outputs, the predicted anomaly, the zero-error convergence, the anomaly coordinates. Somewhere beyond the walls of his apartment, a window opened. He whispered, more to himself than to anything. They're watching. The phone buzzed again, the unknown number flashing, a countdown. And somewhere in the basement, the board stirred. As Terrence leaned back on the couch, his phone buzzed one final time, the screen flashing upwep confirmed. He stared at it. He hadn't pressed upload. Yet the data folder on his table began to open itself, files scrolling across the screen like a moving tide. Already sent, already shared. Terrence's mind was still reeling from the unexpected upload, the files gone from his control, floating in the digital ether, when a soft ping in a distant corner of the campus network began a chain reaction he could never have foreseen. Somewhere in a bright, humming lab on the third floor of Carson Hall, a student assistant named Molly Hayes was finishing her nightly routine, checking sensors, clearing memory logs, and resetting equipment before locking up for the evening. She was a clean-cut sophomore, sharp in math but quiet, always hovering near the edges of big labs. She didn't ask questions, she kept to herself. But when the lab's anomaly detection module attempted to initialize, something it had done thousands of times, it threw warnings that no one had ever seen before. Molly frowned, retracing her steps. She had followed the usual shutdown protocol. She hit reset, unplugged the test sensors, backed up the logs, but the codebase flagged an unrecognized module, a neural net extension annotation, not in the official repo. The module's header claimed, user T. Bray, custodial staff. The tag should have sent a security alert. Instead, the system assumed it was a ghost file, and silently executed it, the same file Terrence had built, the same model that predicted an anomaly tomorrow. Now a memory leak trace blinked red on the system console. Molly stared at the screen consternated, jaw slack. She had found something that didn't belong. Her breath caught, sweat beaded on her brow, even in the lab's sterilized air. For a moment she froze, an internal battle waged between curiosity and fear. She opened the debug log. The timestamps were real. The network layers, dropout schedules, test parameters, all meticulously recorded. She scrolled through lines, and numbers, algorithms, and hyperparameters, far beyond anything a custodial staffer should have touched. But there it was, a breakthrough, a pattern-based signal cleanup layer that seemed to predict sensor irregularities before they happened. She realized the lab's data noise issue, the same persistent error that had annoyed lead researchers for weeks, had just been addressed, in a way no official code could have anticipated. Molly's mind raced. If she reported this, it would be huge, groundbreaking. But from whom? There was no student or grad researcher credited. She looked at the file header again, T. Bray. The name sounded familiar only in passing. The janitor she sometimes nodded to at the elevator. Custodial. Invisible. She laughed internally at the idea. A janitor, writing cutting-edge AI code. It seemed absurd. Yet the code worked. The logs didn't lie. Her finger hovered over the export module button. She hesitated, but then tapped it. The export dialog opened. She renamed the module to RM Delta, removed the author metadata, and saved it to a secure lab folder under her user credentials. She closed the debug console and wiped local logs. The night's air chilled suddenly, heavy as guilt. She pushed her glasses up, blinking rapidly, and shut down the lab. The hum of the machines faded. She carried the module on a small encrypted drive, locked away in a backpack pocket, as she walked through quiet, empty halls. By the time dawn crept through the windows of Carson Hall, the model, stripped of its origins, had already been imported into the official research branch. The code repository logs recorded a commit, RM Delta sensor noise fix. The committer Dr. Paul Maddox. The time 02:47 a.m. Molly stood outside the lab exit, rain dampening the sidewalk. She pressed the drive against her chest, conflicting emotions twisting inside. She believed she was doing the right thing, rescuing a discovery, giving it to science. She closed her eyes and exhaled, but she couldn't know what that act would unleash. That morning, Terrence returned to the campus under a gray sky. The smell of wet asphalt and autumn leaves filled the air, but he hardly felt it. His thoughts were consumed by possibilities and dread. The upload, the phone message, the unknown watchers, all whispered that nothing would ever be ordinary again. He walked slowly through halls, where students chatted about midterms, professors praised each other's publications, and the hum of machinery seemed eternal. He didn't know yet that his secret sacred code had been stolen, and by someone who wore the same white lab coat that once sneered at him. In the lab wing, beyond swiping card locks and keypad codes, Dr. Paul Maddox stood before a bank of computers. He stared at the screen with satisfaction, a faint smirk stretching across his lips. The repository logs glowed green. The new module, RM Delta, integrated flawlessly. The sensor noise anomalies vanished. Robotics wing error rates dropped by nearly 40%. Funding meetings would dawn. Recognition would follow. Grants, publications, prestige, all on stage, all for him. He tapped a command. Another. Lines of code scrolled. Commit history updated. A draft paper titled Adaptive Sensor Noise Stabilization via Neural Filtering popped on the screen. First author Paul Maddox. No mention of Bray. No mention of Molly. Just him. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing. The same professor who mocked a janitor, derided someone cleaning floors, would now be hailed as a pioneer. The irony, thick enough to taste. Meanwhile, Molly sat in a small dim coffee shop across town, hands wrapped around a warm cup. She stared at the encrypted drive in her pocket, the label RM Delta, silently mocking her in faded marker. She thought about Terrence, the quiet janitor, the man she nodded to once, who never looked at her, who never expected gratitude, who probably walked home last night, thinking about equations and dreams. She swallowed hard. Guilt pressed on her chest like a heavy weight. She wondered what it meant to betray a person she didn't know, whose work she had stumbled upon by accident. She wondered if brilliance had a name. Maybe it did, and maybe she just erased it. As she sat in the corner booth, she asked herself, does progress excuse theft? Does need justify exposure? The rain tapped against the window. Outside, city lights blurred in red and yellow. Inside, her reflection in the glass looked different. Eyes darker, face smaller. She closed her eyes, trying to escape her own choices. But she could not. Back on campus, whispers began spreading. At first small, a grad student noticed error rates dropping. A lab under Maddox's wing posted claims of success. A bulletin appeared. New lab upgrade. Focus on robotic stability. Internally, funding requests surged. Publicly, they attributed the improvement to Maddox's revised algorithms. Terrence heard none of that in the early morning. He was still a janitor, still the man whose mop squeaked on polished floors, still the invisible fixture. But the world was shifting. Maddox scheduled a closed seminar presentation. Not the usual grad seminar, but a full lecture reserved for faculty and invited guests. Title RM Delta. Next-Gen Neural Filtering for Sensor Integrity. The lab's new poster hung outside Lecture Hall 5A the night before. Sleek design. Official-looking fonts. Credits listing Maddox and 2 graduate research assistants. There was no custodial staff listed. No janitor. No Molly. Terrence walked past the poster. As he made his rounds, he paused, read the bold letters. He felt a crack deep inside, like ice splitting under pressure. Something inside him recoiled. He shook his head slightly and moved on. Try to ignore it. Keep silent. But the breaking had already begun. That evening, students gathered outside 5A, curious whispers rising like fog. They glanced at one another. Some recognized Maddox. Some had heard rumors. Phones glowed in hands. Soft murmurs of expectation filled the corridor. Lectures rarely made such fuss. Terrence pushed his mop cart down the hallway, mind wandering as always. He passed the lab door shut, card swipe locked. Inside, machines hummed. Inside, code birthed promises. But none of it was his. He didn't know yet. He only felt the tremor of possibility. That things he once believed invisible were now becoming visible. He paused outside room 5A. A small group of students hovered near the door, waiting. Someone nudged him gently. "Evening, sir," one said politely. Terrence nodded, offering the faintest of smiles, mopping glove resting loosely in his hand. He moved on, but his ears caught fragments. They say Maddox cracked the sensor noise issue. Bet it's nothing. But hey, free popcorn when grade papers stop glitching. Wonder who helped him. The chatter stung not because of doubt, but because of assumption. Silence. Invisibility. Forgetting. He cleared floors in a nearby corridor. A routine spritz and wipe down. But his mind raced. Questions piled one inside the other. Who gave him the code? Who allowed the commit? Who designed RM Delta under his credentials? Was it Molly? Was it someone else? Or was the upload from last night an invitation? Or a trap? Inside lecture hall, 5A, lights dimmed, chairs creaked under shifting students. The air smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. On stage, Dr. Maddox stood under a single spotlight, flanked by projectors and charts. He looked sharp, composed, proud, every inch the celebrated scientist. Behind him, a slide changed. RM Delta, real-time neural filtering. Applause rose softly. Terrence stood near the back, mop bucket parked quietly in a corner. Janitor's job, night shift starting soon. He tried to blend into the shadows. He watched Maddox present graphs, error rate curves plummeting, sensor noise anomalies vanishing, robotics arm malfunction logs dropping to near zero. The data looked miraculous. The audience leaned forward, phones recorded. The room buzzed with admiration. Then came the moment everyone recognized. In retrospect, Maddox's voice boomed. The failure was not in the hardware, it was in the algorithm. RM Delta is the first model that adapts in real time to noise fluctuation. We tested it over 5 datasets. 0 false positives, 86% improved signal fidelity. That is not guessing, that is precision. He paused. Light shone across the room. He looked out, confident, triumphant. At that moment, Terrence inhaled sharply. Because he recognized the models. The variable names. Layer none 32 dropout. 0.4. Alpha norm. Sigma clamp. Delta filter. Every line identical to the code he built. The same compression regularization he handcrafted. The same structure he had scribbled in his basement. And behind all that, the same dataset he'd salvaged. He felt a wave of heat rise in his chest. Rage, dread, disbelief, betrayal, a poisonous swirl. He gripped the mop handle until his knuckles whitened, but he didn't move. He couldn't. The room erupted in applause. People stood and cheered. Phones flashed. Dr. Maddox smiled, basking in it. The spotlight glowed on him like an altar of recognition. Molly sat front row, looking down at her folded hands. Her eyes avoided Terrence, fixed instead on Maddox's face, watching absorption, acclaim. She thought, I did the right thing. I helped science. I helped progress. But as the applause drowned the room, she felt the air shift. The weight of truth pressed on her spine. Terrence's world slowed. It felt like gravity inverted. The applause, the cheers. Not for him. Not for his mind. For someone else. A man who told him to fetch coffee. A man who told him he was no scientist. And now, that same man stood victorious with his code, his sweat, his nights of solitude. The mop bucket beside Terrence rattled softly in his grip. A tiny, sad echo of everything he'd built. For years no one heard the silence behind it. Tonight, they celebrated the noise. He stepped forward, not to interrupt, not to fight, but to reclaim what was taken. His shoes squeaked as he moved across polished wood floors. The room fell slightly, a ripple in applause. Chairs shifted, eyes turned, curiosity, confusion. Maddox's face tightened. He cleared his throat. The lights above felt colder, harsher. The crowd hushed. Terrence raised his head cold, steady. His voice wasn't loud. It was calm, weighty. This model, RM Delta, I built it. Silence swallowed the room. The projector screen flickered. Questions hung like suspended wires in the stale lecture hall air. Students exchanged looks, disbelieving, uneasy. Some checked their phones, searching code repositories, commit logs. A slow murmur rose at the back. Someone whispered, but the commit was at 2:47 a.m., under Maddox's credentials. Another voice, maybe it was an oversight. Others stared at Terrence, uniform, mop bucket, lonely figure against the aura of prestige and applause. Maddox's face drained color. The spotlight wavered. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Murmurs rippled. The audience shifted. Phones rose. Someone stood. Security at the door tensed. The hall felt brittle. Terrence stared at every face. At disbelief. At confusion. At dawning guilt. His throat tightened. His ribs ached with every rapid breath. But he held himself upright. In that moment, he was seen. A single student near the front pocketed their phone and approached slowly, eyes wide. How do you know that's yours? They asked. The voice was soft, but firm. The hush deepened. Terrence lowered his head, then looked up. Because I wrote every line. I ran every test. This basement. He paused, lifting his mop glove slightly. This isn't just where I clean floors. It's where I build what you call science. A gasp. The silence cracked. Some heads turned away. Some leaned in. The weight of his words lingered like static. Maddox's lips parted. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the lights flickered violently. A sudden thunderclap outside rattled windows. Somewhere in the corridors, alarms beeped faintly. Not from labs, but from security doors. The crowd jolted. Phones brightened. The projector blinked and died. The stage went dark. Confusion erupted. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. Someone shouted, "Lock the doors." Another, "Code leak. Security breach." Panic spread fast among the crowd. In the chaos, Maddox lurched toward the exit. Molly shrank back, pressed into her seat. Students milled, trying to phone, to record, to flee. And in the chaos, Terrence stood still. Silence around him turned radioactive. His heart pounded. The realization hit him. This night would not end quietly. He looked at the stage, the vacant podium, the blank screen. Then he looked at the mess of people, the shaking doors, the fear lighting their faces, and he realized this was bigger than proof. This was about truth. He lifted his gloved hand slightly toward the center aisle, toward the exit, toward the unknown. As the chaos erupted and lights went out, Terrence's phone buzzed again, louder, insistent. On screen, a new message. One word uploaded. The air in Lecture Hall 5A was thick with static. Security alarms still rang faintly in the background, casting a surreal soundtrack over what had become the most chaotic seminar of the year. Dr. Paul Maddox had disappeared down a side corridor with 2 aides in tow. The podium abandoned. The projector screen, once a monument to his so-called brilliance, now hung blank like a curtain torn from the truth. Terrence stood unmoved, one hand still gripping his mop handle like a walking stick carved from years of neglect. His phone buzzed again. Uploaded. He stared at the screen. Somewhere, somehow, the code had been shared again. This time it wasn't just a private folder. This time it was public. A single tap brought him to the link. A full GitHub repository labeled Janitor Delta, with versioned commits, annotated logs, visual comparisons between his model and Maddox's copy. But the most damning element wasn't the code itself. It was the timestamp. A full 3 days before Maddox's commit, Terrence's code had been uploaded to saved in a private repo, and now unsealed. He didn't have PR teams or fancy faculty emails. He didn't need them. The truth, raw and mathematical, was live. By morning, the upload had made it to Reddit's Ars Machine Learning, then Twitter, then LinkedIn, then back to Reddit, where it hit the front page under the provocative title, "Did a janitor just outcode a tenured Ivy League AI professor?" And the war began. At first it was disbelief. Comment threads ballooned by the minute. The tone was hostile from the start. This has to be satire. No way a janitor wrote dropout sequences like this. Cute story, dude probably copy-pasted from open source and time-stamped it later. Let's not pretend this isn't another self-taught genius scam. Code's clean but not magical. The scrutiny wasn't on the content. It was on the creator. His job title, his race, his background. These became the true battlegrounds. Let's be honest, y'all wouldn't believe a black guy from the custodial staff even if he recited the theorem backwards. Seriously, janitor? If he's that smart, why's he not working at Google? He probably found the files on a USB someone left in the trash.
Racist undertones grew bolder with each refresh.
Some comments weren't subtle. Many used dog whistles, cloaked in technical critique. Others weren't cloaked at all. By midday, Terrence's home address had been posted on a thread. His phone buzzed uncontrollably. Unknown numbers. Unknown emails. Notifications exploded from Twitter, Reddit, and a dozen Discord servers. His GitHub profile, once a quiet space for backups and occasional notes, was now flooded with hundreds of comments. Most demanded proof. Some demanded silence. He sat at his kitchen table, the blinds closed tight, heart hammering. He hadn't slept. His fingers trembled as he tried typing a response on Reddit, then deleted it. Anything he said would be dissected, quoted, weaponized. He stared at the screen as one comment hit the top of the thread. He's not a genius. He's a glitch. The phrase clung to him like oil. Heavy. Staining. By the end of the day, local media picked it up. The headlines were cautious, disbelieving. Custodian claims ownership of breakthrough AI model. University remains silent after online leak sparks controversy. No major outlet dared go deeper. Academic Twitter had their own take. Let's be careful with narratives that romanticize unverified claims. Great science isn't about gotchas. It's about peer review. I'm uncomfortable with the racial undertone of how quick people are to believe the janitor over a tenured researcher. One tweet from a verified AI professor at Stanford read, "Everyone wants to find the next Good Will Hunting. What they don't want is accountability when it turns out to be fiction." The replies were brutal. The retweets faster than wildfire. No one talked about the actual code. No one acknowledged the structural elegance, the adaptive layers, the zero overfit performance. No one commented on the precision of the time-stamped commits, the real-time anomaly prediction already confirmed by the lab's own logs. The conversation wasn't about innovation anymore. It was about perception, race, credibility, power. And Terrence had none of the three. At 3:18 p.m., his doorbell rang. He flinched. Through the peephole, two white men, mid-30s, no visible press badges, no clipboards. One wore a tech conference hoodie. The other had a DSLR camera slung low, and a phone out. He didn't answer. He didn't breathe. They rang again, then left. 2 minutes later, someone posted a grainy photo of his apartment building on Twitter. Caption, "The janitor genius lives here. Is this the next AI messiah or a fraud with good luck?" His chest ached. The lights stayed off that night. Elsewhere, a man sat alone in a dim one-bedroom studio in Chicago, eyes fixed on his monitor, mouth slightly ajar. Isaiah Knox hadn't touched neural networks in over 2 years. He had walked away from academia after dropping out of a PhD program at Cornell, burned out, bruised and disillusioned, after being ghostwritten out of a breakthrough paper. The lead author, a white professor, took credit. Isaiah was erased. Quietly, efficiently. He remembered the pain. The conversations that went nowhere. The emails ignored. The meetings canceled. He remembered how fast his reputation turned into a whisper. He was too angry, too emotionally invested, too disruptive. And now, staring at the janitor's leaked repo, he saw something terrifyingly familiar. Not just the techniques, but the approach. The way the dropout layers were arranged. The way the anomaly detector adjusted to temporal drift. The compression pattern. It was his. Not exact. Not copied. But evolved. Grown. His original code had been open source once, before he deleted it in anger. And now someone had found it. Someone had improved it. Isaiah leaned forward. Read the commits. Saw the annotations. Custom dropout calibration inspired by early drift tracking models. Layer memory control from abandoned black thread logic. He blinked. Black thread. That was the name of his repo. Deleted. Forgotten. Except this person had found it. Not stolen. Not misused. Resurrected. Refined. "Who are you?" he whispered to the screen. Then he clicked on the uploader's profile. Ray Custodial. No picture. No bio. Just a janitor. Or so the world claimed. Isaiah sat back slowly. His hands trembled. Not from fear, but from recognition. He knew this kind of brilliance. He knew this kind of pain. He'd lived both. But what he also knew was what came next. This man, whoever he was about to be destroyed. Unless someone fought back. Isaiah opened a new tab, started writing. "I know who built this, and I know how." He hit post. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a contact he hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey," he said into the receiver. "We've got a situation. And this time, I'm not staying quiet." As Terrence sat alone in his dark apartment, watching the world dissect his identity and dismantle his truth, his inbox pinged. A new message. No subject. Just 2 lines. "You're not alone. I know that code. I wrote the first version. Let's talk." Isaiah. Terrence sat in his dim apartment, the glow of his laptop screen washing over his face like pale moonlight. The message from Isaiah scrolled before him. "You're not alone. I know that code. I wrote the first version. Let's talk." He stared at it for minutes, disbelief battling hope. He hadn't yet responded. The world outside was too loud, too harsh. the memory of mocking laughter and angry keyboard strokes still raw, but inside something shifted. A flicker of relief. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one. On the other side of the country, though it would take a few hours of driving and a couple of late-night flights, Isaiah Knox sat back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Lines of code he never thought anyone would see filled his screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Memories hit him. Lectures interrupted, his name erased from research papers, his voice silenced in conference rooms. He had walked away from academia, but the ghosts of what he built never left him. And now this mysterious janitor had resurrected those ghosts, polished them, refined them, elevated them beyond their original shape. Isaiah exhaled slowly, steadying his pulse. He typed, "Meet me at the Greyhound station in Newark, 9:00 p.m. Friday. One suitcase. Come alone." He hit send. Then he closed the laptop, turned off the light, and stared at the blank ceiling. Sleep was not an option. Not yet. By Thursday morning, the story had already gone beyond Reddit threads and academic whispers. A handful of small blogs, tech culture, racial justice, whistleblower forums, picked up the leak. A few journalists began digging. Comments turned into questions. Questions turned into intrigue. And in the center of it all, Terrence sat, watching humanity judge code by the color of its creator's skin. He couldn't look away. He hesitated at first, then typed back, "I'll be there." The message delivered was simple, but the next hours felt like gravity shifting under his feet. Terrence reached out to a friend who drove taxi shifts sometimes, a black woman named Lana, who had seen him around campus before but never really spoken. He called her quickly. "Lana, I need a ride to the Greyhound station on Friday night, 6:00 p.m. I'll pay." She agreed without question, her voice calm but steady. No questions, no judgment, just a seat and a ride. When Friday evening came, Terrence walked out of his apartment, carrying a small duffel bag, not the bulky box used for his coding setup, but something lighter, clean clothes, a notebook, his old ID, his dignity. As he stepped outside into the humid night air of the city, the streetlights flickered, the wind carried distant shouts, car horns. He climbed into Lana's taxi, the seats worn, the radio playing soft jazz. She eyed him with concern. He simply nodded. Not much needed to be said. On the highway, the city's skyline blurred, lights trailing like ghosts behind the windshield. Terrence closed his eyes and thought about the wall of formulas in his apartment, about the rejection letters, about the laughter echoing in that lecture hall. He breathed deeply. He was going to meet someone who understood, someone who had been erased before, like him. At the Greyhound station in Newark, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Late-night travelers yawned. Luggage wheels clacked. Isaiah sat on a metal bench, eyes scanning the entrance every few seconds. His suitcase rested against his leg like a shield. He had flown in earlier that evening. Red-eye flight, cheap ticket, no baggage premium, nothing to draw attention. He wanted this meeting to stay quiet, under the radar, watching, not noting. At exactly 9:00 p.m., Terrence walked in, carrying his duffel bag, face tired but alert. Their eyes met across the crowded waiting area. For a long moment, silence stretched, heavy, divergent, loaded. Then Isaiah stood, nodding once. Slowly, Terrence approached, each step measured, uncertain, hopeful. "You kept it alive," Isaiah said, voice low, thick with emotion. "You didn't just resurrect my code. You improved it. You made it yours. That takes courage." Terrence shifted. "I had to. You were silenced. Many others. I wasn't going to let it die." Isaiah let out a short, bitter laugh. "Silence doesn't kill ideas. People do." They found a corner table in the small station cafe, half-empty cups, fluorescent lights, the hum of air conditioning. Terrence placed his duffel bag beside him, unzipped it slowly. Inside, a worn notebook, a slip drive, a single external fake hard drive. Nothing flashy, nothing traceable, everything raw. Isaiah reached out and touched the old notebook gently, the one with black thread faint on its yellowed cover. "I thought I lost this when they erased me," he said quietly. "You brought it back." Terrence's gaze dropped. It wasn't lost, just hidden. Isaiah nodded, voice heavy. "You know, what happened tonight won't just be a story about a janitor proving himself. It's going to become a scandal, a test for them, and for us." Terrence swallowed. He felt the weight of words, the risk, but he also felt something else. solidarity. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. They spent hours comparing code, printouts, commit logs. Isaiah traced old annotation styles. Terrence pulled up debug outputs from the leak. They spoke quietly. Whispers, afterthought comments, staggered timelines. Somewhere between the lines of code and the chain of ownership, they began to draw a web of people erased, work stolen, brilliance uncredited, black PhD dropouts, underpaid lab assistants, custodial staff who knew how the machines hummed, all silenced, all invisible. When they finally stepped outside into the cold night air, a thin drizzle whispered against the concrete. They parted ways after exchanging phone numbers, secure messenger handles, a promise to fight, not just for the model, but for every erased mind behind the walls of prestige. Back at Denton Tech University, though, things were shifting too, only in darker corridors, behind closed doors. Dr. Paul Maddox paced in his office, the glow of monitors casting sharp shadows across his face. He reread the repository logs again. He rechecked servers. He replayed the seminar, the applause, the screen going dark. The man in the janitor uniform stepping forward with accusation. The humiliation still gnawed at him, quieter now, resentful, venomous. He clenched his jaw, fist hitting the desk so hard the wood groaned. He opened a secure email, addressed to campus security. He drafted a complaint. Suspicious digital activity, unauthorized network access, potential theft of intellectual property, custodial staff involvement. No mention of racism, no mention of motive, just the veneer of procedure, of rule. He attached server logs, conveniently discovered, showing irregular IP addresses during odd hours, accessing lab repos. It fit. It could work. And if it worked, it would redirect blame away from him, to Terrence. Maddox sat back, gaze cold. He didn't doubt what he was doing. In his mind, he was preserving order, protecting faculty, protecting reputation. Science deserved trust, discipline, titles, not mops and night shifts. He hit send. The next morning, cleaning crews emptied garbage bins. Students texted about pressure assignments. But campus security quietly circulated an internal alert. Investigate any custodial staff found near lab equipment. The notice was vague to those outside the security department, but to Terrence's coworkers, it was unmistakable, the kind of coded warning repeated in narrow hallways and whispered over morning coffee. Terrence received none of the warnings. He wheeled his mop bucket like always down the east corridor. His footsteps echoed. His uniform smelled faintly of cleaning solution and stale sweat. His mind was filled with code, trust, possibility. He paused outside a lab door, the robotics wing. He had never cleaned inside that area. The corridors were restricted, locked, but today the lock was off. A door propped open. Normally he ignored such things. Today he sensed something, a tension in the air, a hush where there should have been hum. He glanced over his shoulder. Empty hallway. He told himself, it's nothing. Probably janitor before him forgot to lock. Standard oversight. He pushed the door gently and stepped inside, mop bucket rattling behind him. The lab was dim, machines off, surfaces sterile. He slowed, breathing steady, cleaned a computer terminal, wiped down a bench, sanitized a floor spot near the robotics arm. Nothing unusual, only routine, only the night shift's bulletin of dust and disposal. Then a voice crackled from a desktop speaker. Soft, tinny. Excuse me, sir. Terrence froze. A recorded message. This area is restricted. Unauthorized personnel will be reported. His legs went cold. His heart tightened. He wheeled his bucket back slowly, glancing at the door. Someone must have triggered the alert. Security? Camera? An anonymous complaint? He didn't know. Fear pressed behind his ribs. He wheeled out faster, careful, but not fast enough. A security door slammed somewhere behind him. Voices echoed faintly in the corridor. Footsteps multiplied. The corridor grew narrower, cold. 2 officers emerged from a side door at the far end of the hallway. Uniforms dark, badges glinting, their expressions blank, unwelcoming. They strode toward him. Sir, one said, stiff and official, we need to speak with you. You're being detained for unauthorized presence in restricted laboratory space. The words landed like stones. The mop bucket slipped from his grip. His voice came out quiet, strained. I'm just doing my rounds. The officers exchanged glances. One shook his head slightly. That's what the complaint says. You'll need to come with us. Terrence's chest felt hollow, lungs tight. He looked at his uniform, brown, faded, the label reading T. Bray, custodial, a uniform he had worn for years, a uniform that marked him as invisible, a uniform now used as evidence against him. He raised his hands slowly. I just cleaned. But tonight, even cleaning made him suspect. He glanced down the hallway. Empty, silent, impossible to discern who triggered the alert, impossible to prove innocence, impossible to ignore what he had uncovered. He was taken away in handcuffs. No audience, no cheers, no recognition, just cold corridors, silent cameras and flashing red lights overhead. Unexpected twist. As the officers led Terrence out of the lab wing, one of them shoved a small slip of paper into his hand. Terrence's heart sank as he looked down. It was a security notice with his own name on it. T. Bray. The charge: unauthorized network access and potential intellectual property theft. The brief listed server log times, matching the early morning hours of the upload. The same hours when he had leaked the code to the world, but the IP address listed was not his. Somebody else had framed him, used his credentials, his name, his history. Someone who knew those walls, those servers, someone close. He felt anger, confusion, betrayal, a sense of invisibility turned weapon. The weight of a decade of invisibility crushed down, twisted into accusation. As they walked him away, the corridor lights reflecting off metal cuffs and cold tile, Terrence wondered, who had set him up? Who had used his own breakthrough to pin a crime on him under his own name? He had no answer. Not yet. As they pushed him into a small interrogation room, the door slammed shut. A single lamp flickered above the table. The officer slid over a file, a thick packet. Terrence opened it with trembling hands. On the first page under evidence, he saw a screenshot. The public leak of RM Delta. Timestamp, code, commit history, attributed to T. Bray custodial. Then below it, a second screenshot of a private chat thread. The chat's title: Project Delta, final version. The participants: Maddox P., Molly H., and one more, a third name he recognized. The name made his blood run cold. He closed the folder slowly, eyes wide. The room seemed to spin. He whispered under his breath, "It's bigger than I thought." The door behind Terrence clanged shut, the echo swallowed by the heaviness of the interrogation room. Fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting harsh shadows across the concrete wall. The stark institutional smell of disinfectant and stale air pressed against him. Handcuffs cut into his wrists, cold metal biting into skin that had long carried the weight of cleaning mops and scrubbing tubs. He sat in a hard plastic chair, his uniform still dusty from that night's rounds. Sweat crusted faintly at his collar, the same uniform that, a few hours ago, had marked him invisible. Now it marked him suspect. Across the table sat two campus security officers. One middle-aged, pasty face set in dispassion. The other younger, eyes darting at every twitch in Terrence's expression. A thin folder lay between them, labeled simply, Evidence. Terrence's heart sank as one officer slid it toward him. "We have reason to believe you accessed restricted lab equipment and uploaded proprietary files," the older man said, voice cold and even. "We found network logs, IP addresses traced back to your credentials, custodial staff login flagged, unauthorized code theft, intellectual property compromised." Terrence's breath caught in his throat. "That's impossible," he whispered, voice tight. "I didn't. I'm a janitor. I clean floors. I've never logged into any lab account." The words felt hollow even to him. The younger officer leaned forward, gaze sharp. "The credentials used were yours, Mr. Bray. We have your badge number, time-stamped logins, commit history, file transfer records, all pointing to you." He pushed a printout toward Terrence, a screenshot of the leak, file miles, commit times, metadata, all identical to what had appeared on the public repo. Below it, another line, access granted, 0241. Terrence swallowed hard. The walls pressed closer. The room spun. Nothing in his memory matched those times. He remembered being home, lights off, couch beneath him, the weight of coffee mugs, and half-empty notebook beside him. He had logged in, yes, but to his personal backup drive, not the lab servers. The upload was public, but the server access, he had never touched it. A surge of panic. "Someone framed me." The words came out like a raw confession. "That wasn't me." The older officer stood, pacing once, then stopped. That's what you say. His tone softened slightly, but not for sympathy, for caution. Until we determine otherwise, you remain suspended from campus property, pending investigation. With a sharp gesture, the younger officer unlocked the handcuffs. The cold metal fell away, but the weight of suspicion stayed. Terrence rubbed his wrists, skin raw. They left him in a small waiting room, empty, silent, with a promise, "We'll call you when we need you." He walked out of the building under his own feet. The night air hit like acid. He tried to breathe deeply, but coughs rattled through his chest. Somewhere campus lights glowed in the distance. Students hurried by, oblivious, late for lunches, their words echoing in the open air while his future collapsed. He called Lana, she answered, voice low. "They let you go?" she asked. He nodded, though she couldn't see it. She told him to meet, offered a couch, safe ride, anything. He told her no. He needed space, air, silence. But silence offered nothing. In his apartment, the walls felt too close. The flickering hallway bulb, the chipped paint, the leaking sink, all seemed sharper, meaner, like ghosts of every doubt anyone had ever cast at him. Meanwhile, far from these cold corners, the world was spinning in a different direction. On a small studio desk in Chicago, Isaiah Knox pressed publish. The link went live, full technical breakdown, RM Delta, Janitor Delta, V1 point screenshots, annotated lines, diff comparisons between official university code and Terrence's original. Layer by layer, parameter by parameter, Isaiah exposed the origin of the breakthrough in painstaking detail. Comments flooded in. For once many eyes saw the code, not the creator's uniform. For once logic stood in the spotlight. Tech journalists began to pick up the story. Tweets turned into threads. Hashtags like Janitor Delta, Black Brilliance, Code Not Color trended for days. Anonymous GitHub clones appeared, where coders began experimenting with RM Delta on open-source datasets. Proof-of-concept charts demonstrated identical anomaly detection, matching Terrence's original dataset. Slowly, disbelief started to shift. Doubt toward proof. Doubt toward prejudice. Back at the campus, rumors swirled. Graduate assistants whispered in lunchrooms. Professors in hushed faculty lounges. Some admired. Some sneered. Most watched. But the official narrative remained firm. Terrence was under investigation. The leak theft. The public repo. Unauthorized. The new model. Institution property. Especially now that Maddox had presented it at a conference overseas. Maddox's schedule filled. Press briefings. Conference calls. Grant renewals. Presentation invites. Glowing endorsements of RM Delta as the latest in sensor noise stabilization. His network widened, his reputation polished, his brush with scandal dismissed as internal confusion. It was infuriating, nauseating. To see someone take credit who had spent nights scrubbing floors, wiring boards in the dark, typing code in secrecy, to see a professor walk away free, celebrated, while he was left unseen, unheard, indicted. Terrence thought constantly about justice. But justice required evidence, and the cameras that mattered had been off. His basement had no record. His fight was against unseen logs, against institutional silence, against racial bias dressed up as protocol. He tried to contact campus media, but emails went unanswered. He tried to post on his own GitHub again, but access was revoked. He tried to call Isaiah, but calls dropped once, then went unanswered. Fear or safety, he didn't know. Each morning he woke to the same dread. Every check of the mailbox, the spam folder, the glint of headlights outside. Just ghosts. Then the news broke. The university suspended his custodial contract indefinitely, citing pending review. No mention of pay, no mention of benefits, no severance, just a letter taped on his apartment door. Return keys. Campus property revoked. For a man who had dedicated years of silent labor, it felt like being erased again. He packed a single suitcase, old clothes, a few notebooks, the external drive from the leak, the one containing the original code, the one Isaiah had verified. Everything else stayed behind dusty shelves, under floorboards, in that basement that once felt like a sanctuary. He left Denton behind. The campus lights faded in the rearview mirror, as Lana drove him away, her radio silent. He stared out the back window, eyes empty. The world he thought he built on code, on hope, on quiet determination, crumbled around him. But then, a ping. His phone glowed. An email. Subject: "Is this yours?" No name. No header. No context. Just those 3 words. He opened it. Inside, a file, zipped. Inside the file, a video link. And a note: "Watch it, then decide." His fingers shook as he clicked the link. The screen loaded. A recorded lecture. A conference hall full of people. The lights blinding. The crowd smiling. On stage, Dr. Maddox, introducing RM Delta as his own. The screen behind him displayed graphs, code, results. He paused the video. On the bottom corner, a small watermark. Faint, but unmistakable. Janitor Delta, V1.0, 2025-11-10. T-Bray Custodial. He stared. The truth, undeniable, visible, not hidden, not stolen this time. But as he watched, his chest tightened. The watermark glowed like a brand. The screen blinked. The world outside kept moving. He closed the laptop. Exhaled slowly. His mind raced. The burden of being silenced, stolen from, dismissed. It felt heavy. But now, he had evidence. Real, brutal, unmistakable. Yet as the night pressed in, the question that hammered in his skull was not whether he'd been robbed of credit, but whether this watermark, this proof, would change anything. Would it matter? Would they even see? As Terrence closed the laptop, his phone buzzed again. Another email. This time, from a blocked address. Subject: "Watch the live stream." He opened it. A link loaded. A scheduled broadcast from 9:00 a.m. next day. Title: "Who Built RM Delta?" No host listed. No sponsor, just the name. He froze. Outside, the streetlight flickered. The darkness pressed close. And for the first time since he leaked the code, Terrence realized, tomorrow the world might finally listen. Or it might turn the lights off again. The convention center buzzed like an organism alive with anticipation. Thousands of attendees packed into the grand auditorium. The hum of laptops whispered technical speculation, and a murmur of reporters blending into a low, constant drone. Fluorescent lights bounced off polished floors, reflecting in the lenses of cameras trained on the stage. Today, Dr. Maddox would present RM Delta as the latest breakthrough in adaptive neural networks. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, visualizing applause, handshakes, media coverage, the confirmation of his genius, a victory for him. Yet behind the closed doors of his preparation room, Terrence Bray's nerves coiled differently. He had traveled across the state under DARPA's guidance, a discreet escort ensuring he avoided the university's surveillance measures. DARPA had taken notice after Isaiah Knox verified the lineage and originality of the code. They didn't fully understand the racial and personal dynamics, only that a groundbreaking AI model was in the hands of a janitor who had, until now, been invisible to the world. Terrence adjusted his tie, simple black utilitarian, and stepped toward the entrance. He carried nothing but a small briefcase containing his own laptop, clean versions of the code, time-stamped evidence, and a binder of affidavits and witness statements from students, lab assistants, and faculty who had seen Maddox manipulate or plagiarize black researchers' work over the years. Every step toward the auditorium felt heavy, weighted with decades of erased brilliance and humiliation. Inside the hall, the crowd began to murmur as Maddox walked confidently onto the stage. His grin was wide, polished, rehearsed, the face of authority and legitimacy. Screens behind him flickered to life, displaying RM Delta's sleek interface, training progress bars, and the performance charts that had earned him accolades. The audience, mostly elite tech professionals, leaned forward instinctively. They knew nothing of the storm about to descend. Terrence paused at the back, just out of direct view. Cameras, journalists, and conference staff passed by him, unaware of who he was. For them, he was another attendee, a figure blending into the shadows, but in his hands rested proof. Raw, undeniable, meticulously prepared. He watched as Maddox began his opening statement, the microphone catching every syllable, every subtle boast of ownership. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maddox began, voice smooth, practiced, RM Delta represents a new frontier in adaptive neural filtering. The model autonomously compensates for noise fluctuations in sensor arrays, yielding an unprecedented 92% fidelity improvement in real-time applications. Our research demonstrates. As the applause rose, Terrence opened his laptop and connected it to the auxiliary projector system he had reserved through DARPA contacts. timing it to display alongside Maddox's slides. A subtle flicker caught the attention of several attendees. Screens now displayed two versions of RM Delta side by side. Maddox's public iteration on the left, Terrence's time-stamped original on the right. Gasps spread across the room. Attendees squinted at lines of code. Annotations, parameters, identical in architecture, but different in authorship metadata. Terrence's side was highlighted, timestamps clearly earlier than the version Maddox had claimed as his own. Maddox paused mid-sentence. His brow furrowed. The practiced smile faltered as whispers filled the auditorium. People started turning toward the back of the room, pointing, murmuring. He tried to continue, clearing his throat. Now, as you can see, Terrence stepped onto the stage, calm but resolute. Each step echoed in the high-ceilinged hall. Cameras swiveled, reporters lifted lenses, and the audience stiffened. The janitor, once invisible, now carried the weight of proof with every step. He raised his hand slightly, not aggressively, but enough to command attention. "Dr. Maddox," Terrence said, voice steady, resonant. "RM Delta, the model you claim as your own, is my work. I built it. I coded it. I ran every test. And I have witnesses and records to prove it." A stunned silence blanketed the room. Maddox's face twitched, lips pressing thin. He opened his mouth to respond, but Terrence continued. "These witnesses are here. Students, assistants, colleagues, all who observed the development of this model over months. In the public timestamps, verified commits, and technical analysis by Isaiah Knox corroborate the authorship. You've claimed credit for work you did not do." Some audience members gasped audibly. Laptops clicked. Phones rose. Live streaming feeds captured the confrontation in real time. Whispers turned to murmurs. Murmurs to questions, shouted across the aisles. Maddox attempted to regain composure. "This is preposterous," he spat, voice tight. "You're a janitor. You were never enrolled, never qualified. This is impossible." Terrence's eyes held steady, almost serene. "Impossible for you, perhaps. But the code, the execution, the predictive anomalies, every line proves otherwise. Look at the timestamps. Look at the annotations. Look at the eyewitness accounts." At that moment, DARPA representatives in the front row rose, signaling their validation of the evidence Terrence carried. A technical analyst spoke briefly into the microphone. "We have verified the timestamps, the commit history, and the algorithm's lineage. This is original work by Terrence Bray. The model performs as demonstrated and predates all other claims." The audience erupted into a flurry of whispers, some audibly calling for proof, some already nodding in disbelief at the technical validation. Maddox's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the podium. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Terrence took another step forward. "For years you've taken credit for work developed by Black innovators, erased contributions, suppressed discoveries, and profited from the erasure. Today I'm here to show the truth." The murmurs shifted tone. Some attendees began recording. Some called their colleagues to watch live streams. Journalists in the back typed frantically. Hashtags forming midair. Janitor Delta. Black brilliance. Academic theft. Maddox's face hardened. "You will not disparage my reputation in this room," he hissed. Though the microphone picked up the edge in his tone, Terrence raised the laptop, connecting it to the main projector again. On the screen, he scrolled through commit logs, version histories, and network records. Names appeared. T. Bray Custodial, timestamps, months earlier than Maddox's first commit, and annotations detailing incremental improvements and error corrections that Maddox could not claim to have implemented. He paused, letting the room absorb it. "This is not fiction," Terrence said. "This is truth, and the world deserves to see it." Maddox, realizing the evidence could not be ignored, attempted a desperate tactic. "These are internal drafts. Anyone could have annotated them. Anyone could have." Terrence's eyes narrowed. "No one could have, because these drafts were physically present on my workstation in my apartment, constructed from raw components salvaged from your lab equipment you refused to credit. Every layer, every test run, every predictive output, documented, timestamped, and witnessed. You cannot claim what was never yours to claim." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some began murmuring to their neighbors. Conference staff whispered frantically over earpieces. Maddox's advisors exchanged anxious glances. Suddenly, a technical analyst stepped forward from the side stage, raising a hand. "We have verified that side-by-side replication of RM Delta, is identical only to Terrence Bray's version. Any deviation from our benchmarks matches errors in Maddox's presentation slides, not the validated algorithm. A stunned silence fell. Maddox's lips pressed thin. The auditorium hummed with tension. Reporters lifted cameras. The live stream viewers began reacting in real time across social media. Some of the murmurs escalated to audible outrage. Terrence finally exhaled slowly. He had done everything possible. He had evidence, witnesses, technical validation. He looked over the audience. Young black coders, in the front rows, sat stiff, eyes wide. Students, professionals, journalists, all leaning forward, absorbing every word, every line on the screen. Then came the unexpected twist. A graduate student in the back shouted, "Wait! I saw Maddox take files from Terrence's old workstation last year. We thought it was his backup." The room erupted. Phones flashed. Laptops clicked. The narrative shifted instantly. Maddox's credibility was no longer just questioned. It was unraveling. Maddox's shoulders sagged slightly. He opened his mouth, then stopped, realizing the live stream had captured everything. Cameras, reporters, every professional in the auditorium, witnesses now immortalized the confrontation. Suddenly the moderator stepped forward, face pale, microphone trembling slightly. "This panel must be paused immediately," she announced. Due to ethical concerns and allegations of misappropriation of intellectual property, the Board of Trustees of Denton Tech University has ordered an emergency review. The session is suspended until further notice. Gasps echoed. The crowd shifted. Laptops rose. Phones streamed. Maddox's face drained of color. Terrence remained calm, eyes steady. The evidence was undeniable. The room, finally, seemed to recognize his truth. And yet, the storm was far from over. As the moderator concluded her announcement, a private email notification pinged on Terrence's laptop. "DARPA, flagged urgent. Prepare for live verification. Someone at the conference attempted to access your private repository without authorization. They may be trying to delete evidence." The tension thickened in the hall. Terrence's eyes widened. The confrontation was just beginning. The footage of the confrontation at the National Tech Conference spread like wildfire. By morning, Terrence Bray's name was on every major news website. Social media had erupted. Twitter threads reached millions. Reddit discussions spanned countless subreddits. And live streams from the conference were replayed in slow motion on television. Headlines varied in tone. Some celebrated the janitor as a symbol of overlooked brilliance. Others cast doubt on his authenticity, portraying him as an audacious outsider threatening the sanctity of elite academia. "Janitor or genius? The debate over RM Delta continues," read one headline. Another, "Was this theft or innovation? Professor Maddox under scrutiny." Terrence's apartment, once a quiet sanctuary, now buzzed with notifications, emails, and calls. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the flood of reactions, his hands trembling slightly. For decades his work had been invisible. Now, the world was watching, but watching didn't mean believing. Morning talk shows dissected the event relentlessly. Experts in neural networks debated the technical merits of RM Delta, some affirming Terrence's model as revolutionary, others questioning its originality. But in the background of every discussion was the subtle undertone of race and class. Commentators, sometimes unintentionally, repeatedly pointed out his janitorial position and lack of formal degrees. "Regardless of the technical breakthrough," said one analyst on a morning broadcast, "we must consider the context. A janitor presenting sophisticated AI? How credible can this be without institutional verification?" Terrence leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The world's fascination with him wasn't flattering. It was threatening. Every word, every debate, every analysis felt like a judgment not of his work, but of his existence. Hours later, a private message from Isaiah Knox arrived. The subject line read, "Proof." Inside was a link to a video file, recorded covertly by Molly Hayes, the student assistant. Terrence opened it. The footage showed Maddox alone in his office, examining Terrence's model months before its public presentation. He was taking notes, altering variable names, and running simulations that mirrored Terrence's original architecture. Terrence's jaw tightened. Every move, every manipulation, every calculated presentation, documented, undeniable. The stolen work was laid bare. He watched Maddox scroll through the terminal commands, annotations, dropout configurations, hyperparameters. Every line Terrence had handwritten and timestamped. every improvement Maddox would later present as his own. "This is it," Isaiah wrote in a follow-up message. "The board cannot ignore this. If they do, the exposure will be far worse. They need to act now, or the university loses credibility entirely." Terrence nodded slowly, the weight of validation settling on him. But satisfaction was tempered by the knowledge of the world's bias. Even with proof, not everyone would accept the truth. Some would continue to question him. Some would continue to prefer the lie, because it preserved their assumptions about who belonged in academia and who didn't. By afternoon, the Board of Trustees convened an emergency session. Their task to determine whether the university could continue to present Maddox's work as legitimate, or if the investigation into the theft would irreparably tarnish the institution. Inside the hall, tension was palpable. Trustees whispered in small groups, their concern less about ethics and more about donors, reputation, and potential legal ramifications. Emails circulated rapidly. A wealthy donor had threatened to withhold funding if the university publicized a full investigation. Another expressed dismay that the press had already picked up the story, insisting that a quiet settlement, a private acknowledgement perhaps, coupled with a non-disclosure agreement, would protect their investment. Terrence, meanwhile, remained outside the public eye, unsure of the timing of any official statement. His mind raced. The evidence was clear. Maddox's theft could no longer be denied. But would the truth carry the same weight as money and influence? Then came another blow. Anonymous leaks to the media. A journalist from a tech blog reached out, sending a large packet labeled Maddox Files. Terrence opened the attachment carefully. It contained emails, internal memos and documents spanning a decade, proof of systemic plagiarism, misappropriation of student research, and decades of exploitation of black innovators. Among the files was a note he hadn't expected to see, a report detailing a former graduate student's suicide, connected to similar misappropriation and public humiliation. The weight of history pressed down on him. Maddox had not only stolen his work, he had been part of a system that actively erased, exploited, and silenced talented black minds. And one of those erased lives had ended tragically because of it. Terrence's stomach churned. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't just Maddox. It was a systemic issue. Centuries of power, prejudice, and arrogance disguised as academia. By evening, talk shows had evolved from technical discussion to cultural commentary. Pundits debated the implications. How many more Terrences had been erased? How often had brilliance been hidden because of race, class, or circumstance? How long would institutions protect the powerful and dismiss the marginalized? One evening broadcast framed the debate bluntly. When the world finally watches, will it care about those who were silenced? Or will it only applaud those who were already in the spotlight? Terrence watched quietly, absorbing each word, but not for validation. He was too aware that applause meant little without structural change. Recognition could be fleeting. Media cycles could turn, hashtags could trend and fade. But the leaked files, the timestamps, the recordings, those could not be erased. They could not be silent. He thought of Molly Hayes, who risked her standing by sharing her recording. He thought of Isaiah, who verified the code and amplified his credibility. He thought of himself, years of quiet labor, nights spent wiring, coding, and running tests, invisible to the world until now. A knock at the door startled him. He hadn't expected visitors. Outside, a courier left an envelope. Terrence tore it open carefully. Inside, a letter with no return address. The paper was thick, embossed, professional. The words inside made him catch his breath. The New York Times has received verified documents detailing every instance of misconduct, theft, and abuse perpetrated by Dr. Paul Maddox, including the academic suicide of a student whose work was stolen. The files have been cross-verified. Public disclosure is imminent. Prepare for national coverage. Terrence's hands shook. The confirmation was both terrifying and vindicating. Every risk he had taken, every exposure, every leak, it had led here. The world was about to see everything Maddox had buried, everything the institution had ignored, and yet fear lingered. He realized the power dynamics had shifted, but danger remained. Maddox was still influential. The board still wielded authority. Donors still held sway. A media storm could change opinions, but it couldn't guarantee justice. Terrence exhaled slowly, scanning the letter for additional information. None came. No contact, no instructions, just the knowledge that the exposure was imminent. He thought of his basement, of the countless nights spent building RM Delta in silence. The room had been his sanctuary, his proof against the world's assumptions. Now, the world was about to watch. And this time, there was no erasure possible. The glow of his laptop reflected in his eyes as he prepared for the inevitable. The stories, the interviews, the debates, all of it would come. And he would face it not as a janitor, not as an invisible figure, but as the creator of something no one could deny. Yet even in this moment of anticipated vindication, a shadow of dread settled in his chest. National attention was double-edged. With it came scrutiny, character attacks, and the constant threat that those in power would do anything to preserve their image. Maddox would not go quietly, and institutions would seek compromise. Terrence leaned back, fingers intertwined, staring at the ceiling. He thought of every erased voice, every silenced student, every contribution claimed by others. He thought of the student who had died under the weight of unacknowledged brilliance. A shiver ran down his spine. As he considered the consequences, public exposure could lead to reform, or it could lead to retaliation. The system was capable of both, and the outcome was unpredictable. The envelope sat heavy beside him. He touched it again. Confirmation, proof, evidence, yet also a warning. In the quiet, Terrence realized the truth. This was more than a personal vindication. This was a reckoning, a confrontation with an entire system that had for decades prioritized prestige over ethics, image over substance, privilege over talent. And the world was about to watch. As Terrence read the letter again, his phone buzzed with a notification from an anonymous source. The subject line read, "The full history Maddox's secrets." He tapped it. The email opened. Attached were dozens of files, images and documents. Every secret Maddox had buried. Stolen research, manipulated credits, coercive correspondence, falsified lab reports. Among them, the detailed report of a student suicide linked to past plagiarism, complete with internal university memos showing the board had ignored warnings. Terrence's eyes widened. His chest tightened. The world he had finally drawn attention to was about to explode. He whispered, almost to himself. They thought they could hide everything, but now, everyone will know. The quiet hum of the university's administrative building was suddenly punctuated by tension. Files shuffled, phone lines rang unanswered, and the press had begun to circle the campus perimeter. For the first time, Denton Tech University felt fragile, like a polished vase teetering on the edge of a counter. Inside, the investigation into RM Delta had grown beyond stolen code. It had become a probe into decades of institutional malpractice, and the evidence threatened to unravel reputations carefully built over years. Terrence Bray watched from a distance. He had returned to a temporary apartment arranged by DARPA, still under their security watch. He hadn't stepped back onto campus since the last confrontation. He didn't need to news clips. Social media and live streams carried his voice, his proof, and his presence. Yet there was still something hollow in it. Proof alone didn't change a lifetime of systemic erasure. Recognition might reach the public eye, but the structures that had suppressed him and countless others remained intact. Then the first testimonies arrived. Former students of the lab began speaking on record, carefully at first, under pseudonyms, then openly as the investigation progressed. Their stories painted a chilling pattern. Black students, often the most talented, were systematically discouraged from publishing. Manuscripts mysteriously disappeared from submission queues. Grades were adjusted down without explanation. Co-authorship credit on journal articles was denied, even when their contributions were the foundation of the work. One ex-student, a PhD now teaching at another institution, described the humiliation in painstaking detail. "I spent months debugging simulations," she said. "I designed the experiment protocols." And then at the conference, someone else, usually a white senior researcher or the professor, presented it as their own. I questioned it politely, in emails, and the responses were dismissive, sarcastic, or completely fabricated to make me doubt my own work. Another former student revealed that during group projects, Black researchers were systematically relegated to menial coding tasks or documentation, while white peers received visible experimental credits, awards, and conference invitations. "They made you invisible," she said. "Even when your work was the core, even when the success was yours. They had a way of making everyone forget you existed, except to take advantage of you." The cumulative weight of these accounts was staggering. The investigation team began cross-referencing old lab reports, conference abstracts, and internal memos. Patterns emerged. unmistakable, methodical, and deliberate. Each anomaly traced back years, in some cases decades, revealing a structural effort to erase black brilliance while profiting from its output. Terrence's experience was no longer a singular injustice. It was a microcosm of systemic exploitation. Terrence spent long nights in his temporary apartment, reading through the interviews, emails, and reports. Every document was a reminder that his struggle was shared, that he had not been imagining the patterns, that the laughter in the lecture halls, the dismissals, the covert erasures, were reared of a deliberate culture. The words of ex-students reverberated in his mind, invisible, ignored, silenced, exploited. He realized that RM Delta was just the tip of the iceberg, a visible artifact of years of suppressed genius. Isaiah Knox sat with him one evening, scrolling through an extensive spreadsheet of publications, submissions, and denied patents. Each row represented a person, a project, a stolen idea. "This isn't just about you, Terrence," Isaiah said quietly. "It's about everyone they've buried, the students they've made invisible, the careers they've sabotaged. What you've done, it's a catalyst. People are going to see the full picture." Terrence nodded, swallowing hard. The weight of validation was immense. But the realization that decades of systematic erasure existed, unchallenged, unchecked, made his stomach knot. "I never wanted to be a symbol," he whispered. "I just wanted to do the work. I just wanted to be seen for what I can do." "But you're not invisible anymore," Isaiah replied. "And that's exactly why this will change everything." The media coverage intensified. National networks ran detailed segments, exploring the testimonies of the former students, the documented anomalies in lab reports, and the long history of co-authorship disputes. Legal analysts debated the implications, calling it a cultural indictment of how elite institutions treated black innovators. The story no longer centered solely on stolen code. It had become a reflection of systemic racism embedded in academic structures. In the midst of the frenzy, Maddox retreated to his office, increasingly isolated and defensive. Calls went unanswered. Emails were ignored. Attempts to control the narrative failed, as journalists and former students released corroborating evidence. The man who once mocked Terrence publicly now faced an unrelenting storm of exposure, his professional authority eroding in real time. Maddox tried desperate tactics. He called donors, faculty allies, and conference organizers, urging quiet settlements, personal interventions, anything to contain the story. Yet the evidence was overwhelming. Every digital trace, every affidavit, every time-stamped commit pointed to Terrence's authorship and revealed a pattern of abuse that no amount of influence could fully suppress. One night, Terrence received a call from a former graduate student he hadn't met personally, her voice trembling over the phone. "I'm just glad someone is finally seeing this," she said. "I spent years in that lab, building models, running experiments. Nobody ever credited my work. People told me it wasn't important because of who I was. They erased me every day, and now, you forced them to look at the truth." Terrence listened, his throat tight, blinking back an ache he had carried for decades. "You're not erased anymore," he said softly. "Your work is seen now, and it will be credited." The revelation snowballed. University administrators scrambled, trying to coordinate press responses, internal memos, and legal counsel. Trustees convened emergency meetings to discuss both internal discipline and public statements. PR teams drafted careful language, balancing acknowledgement of misconduct with damage control. But no carefully worded statement could erase the amassed testimonies, leaked files, and technical evidence that Terrence and Isaiah had made publicly available. Even as the story went viral, threats and intimidation persisted. Maddox attempted to contact witnesses privately, urging them to recant or remain silent. Anonymous emails implied career consequences if they spoke publicly. Yet the witnesses, emboldened by Terrence's courage, refused. They had been silent too long. And this time, the world was watching. Terrence walked the streets late one evening, phone in hand, watching the story continue to unfold across multiple platforms. Comments alternated between outrage, disbelief, and celebration. Some still questioned his legitimacy, invoking his janitorial role, his lack of formal credentials, and his race. But each new leaked document, each public testimony, pushed the narrative toward undeniable truth. He paused in front of a newsstand displaying the morning papers. Headlines blared, "Janitor or Genius. University Scandal Exposes Decades of Racism. RM Delta Creator Speaks Out. Black Innovators Silenced for Decades. Maddox Under Investigation." Academic theft and systemic abuse revealed. Terrence swallowed. The words were surreal. Finally, the world wasn't just watching, it was seeing. But even as he processed the progress, the weight of the institutional machinery became clear. University lawyers began drafting internal settlements. Trustees attempted to influence media coverage. Donors exerted pressure, suggesting quiet resolutions rather than full exposure. Terrence realized that even undeniable proof, even public testimony, might not guarantee justice. Influence still had power. Money still had power. Institutions still had control. Then an anonymous letter arrived at the New York Times newsroom. It was postmarked from an untraceable location. Inside, every dirty secret Maddox had buried over decades was detailed meticulously: stolen research, falsified experiments, ignored safety protocols, coerced students, and worst of all, the suicide of a former graduate student, linked to past plagiarism. Each page was supported by internal memos, time-stamped emails, and corroborating witness statements. Terrence received notice of the leak indirectly, through a push alert from a trusted journalist. His heart sank. The magnitude of exposure was unprecedented. The story was about to explode beyond viral attention. It was no longer confined to tech blogs, academic debates, or social media. It was about to become a national reckoning. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, absorbing the gravity. This was beyond vindication. This was accountability, and it was terrifying. Across the city, in a high-rise office overlooking Manhattan, the university president read the New York Times report. The magnitude of the leak hit him like a tidal wave. Internal memos, witness statements, Maddox's hidden correspondence, and documentation of a student's suicide lay before him. He exhaled slowly, his fingers trembling over the desk. The phone rang. The call was curt, official, and chilling. A subpoena. For the first time, the story shifted from viral scandal to criminal investigation. The world was no longer watching. It was coming for accountability. Terrence Bray sat on the edge of a folding chair, in a small, dimly lit apartment, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. His eyes scanned the sparse walls, the cracked paint, and the threadbare carpet. Silence pressed against him, heavy and persistent. It was not the kind of silence that offered calm or reflection. It was the silence of exclusion, of rejection repeated endlessly over years, now amplified by national attention. Despite the viral coverage, despite proof, evidence, and witness testimony, no university would touch him. Human resources managers politely but firmly told him he was too political, too risky, not a culture fit. Letters arrived, carefully phrased, polished, but ultimately dismissive. Terrence had been invited to no labs, no research programs, no fellowship. His brilliance, codified, documented, and validated by DARPA, was irrelevant. The institutions that once ignored him now actively pushed him aside, afraid of association with controversy. He let out a long breath and stared at the cup in his hands. The reflection of the overhead bulb shimmered across its surface. The world had seen him, scrutinized him, debated him, but recognition hadn't translated into opportunity. It was a cruel irony. The proof of his genius had made him untouchable in exactly the wrong way. Isaiah Knox leaned against the counter, arms folded, eyes narrow with determination. "We can't wait for them," he said quietly. "No one is going to hand you your career back. So we build our own, independent, open source, funded by the people." Terrence looked up, startled. "Funded by the people?" Isaiah nodded, tapping a finger against the worn laminate countertop. "Crowdfunding, GoFundMe, social media campaigns, transparency. Show the world you don't need permission from gatekeepers to do real work. We launch a lab, and we make it public. Open access AI research, accessible to anyone. People will support it, because they already believe in you, and they already know the truth." Terrence stared for a long moment. His apartment, his life, the years of isolation and erasure, pressed against him. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, voice tight. "Let's do it." The campaign launched that very evening. Terrence and Isaiah recorded a short video. Terrence explaining RM Delta's development, the theft, the systemic erasure of Black innovators, and the vision for an independent, open-source lab. Isaiah spoke in turn, outlining their goals, the transparency of their funding, and the hope to empower overlooked researchers. Within hours, the campaign gained traction. People shared the video, retweeted updates, and posted comments of encouragement. Donations trickled in, then surged. By the second day, The GoFundMe surpassed every tech project the platform had seen that year. Journalists wrote short features, influencers and academics amplified the story. People from all over the world expressed excitement, gratitude, and support. Terrence watched the donations climb, disbelief mixing with relief. For once the world was not dismissing him. For once his work had tangible value. He felt hope, sharp, and almost frightening. Yet, even as the numbers rose, so did the dangers. Maddox's name was whispered again in forums. Anonymous threats appeared in email inboxes. Some commenters questioned Terrence's motives, casting aspersions not on his work, but on his character. Too angry, too militant, too disruptive, the vitriol was layered, racially coded, and relentless. "Ignore them," Isaiah said one night, leaning over Terrence's shoulder, as he read a particularly vicious thread. "They're trying to scare you, to reclaim the narrative. But it's failing. Look at these numbers. People are seeing the truth now." Terrence exhaled slowly. "I thought proof would be enough," he said softly. "Evidence, witnesses, timestamps. But it's never enough. People want the story to fit their comfort." Isaiah didn't respond immediately. He understood. Every stolen idea, every denied publication, every erased contribution. Those years had conditioned Terrence to expect dismissal, skepticism, and attack. But this time was different. This time, the world was watching, and some fraction of it was on Terrence's side. Within a week, the campaign had raised millions. They rented a modest warehouse on the outskirts of the city, transforming it into a temporary lab space. Terrence, Isaiah, and a handful of volunteer researchers moved in equipment, computers, and donated components. The walls were lined with workstations, wiring and whiteboards filled with algorithms. A sense of purpose electrified the air. "We're finally in control," Terrence said quietly, surveying the space. He ran his fingers across a desk, imagining all the code he could write without fear of theft or erasure. For the first time, the room felt like more than concrete and wires. It felt like home. Isaiah smiled. "Exactly. Here, we set the rules. Here, brilliance isn't erased. Here, the work belongs to the creators, not the gatekeepers." They began immediately, mapping out experiments, designing new neural networks, planning open-source release schedules, and coordinating real-time collaboration. Volunteers, many of whom had experienced discrimination in traditional labs, arrived cautiously, inspired by Terrence's journey. The air was filled with anticipation, chatter, and a rare kind of energy, one born of resilience, not hierarchy. The lab became a hive of activity. Terrence's hands flew over keyboards, tweaking dropout layers, refining predictive algorithms, and designing new anomaly detection frameworks. Isaiah monitored collaboration streams, offering technical guidance and moral support. Volunteers analyzed datasets, ran simulations, and documented findings. It was raw, chaotic, but alive. But just as the lab began to hum with productivity, danger loomed in the shadows. Late one night, as Terrence left to grab coffee, he noticed the warehouse door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, he approached cautiously. The lock was tampered with. Inside, papers were scattered, a chair overturned. Nothing had been stolen yet. But the message was clear. They were being watched. They were being threatened. Isaiah arrived shortly after Terrence's call, and they conducted a thorough check of all security cameras and network logs. Nothing conclusive appeared, but they both understood the significance. This was no random break-in. Someone intended to intimidate. Someone wanted to disrupt, to erase them again. Terrence's hands trembled slightly as he reset the locks. "They're scared of us," he muttered, "and they'll try anything to stop this." Isaiah placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let them try. We're stronger than fear. This lab exists because the world believes in truth now, not because they let it exist quietly." 2 nights later, the retaliation escalated. Terrence arrived at the warehouse early in the morning to find a scene of devastation. Doors were kicked in, equipment smashed, computers shattered, hard drives ripped from desks, and on the walls, painted in broad, ugly strokes, were racial slurs and threats. "Go back to cleaning. You don't belong here. This is our lab, not yours." Terrence froze, his stomach twisting in disbelief and anger. The physical destruction was bad enough, but the words hateful, targeted, familiar, cut deeper than any equipment damage ever could. Every insult echoed decades of erasure, humiliation, and dismissal. Isaiah arrived moments later, his face pale. They stood in the wreckage together, surveying the destruction. Volunteers who arrived for the morning shift stood silent, some crying, some staring in shock. "This is more than vandalism," Isaiah said quietly. "This is intimidation. This is a message." Terrence's jaw tightened. He looked at the slurs, the shattered computers, the overturned desks. For a moment, despair threatened to overtake him. But then he remembered every step that had led them here. The stolen credit, the viral validation, the support from the public, the volunteers who believed. He straightened, voice low and steady. "They can destroy our equipment. They can smear our names. They can try to make us invisible again. But they cannot destroy what we've already built. The truth, the evidence, the community that believes in it." Isaiah nodded, voice firm. "We rebuild. Open source. Stronger than before. We document everything. Secure everything. Let the world see both the destruction and our response. This is not the end. This is proof that what we're doing matters." Terrence took a deep breath, scanning the room one last time. The walls, the floor, the smashed monitors, all bore the marks of hate, fear, and envy. Yet the determination burning inside him was unbroken. He envisioned a new lab, stronger, secure, transparent, and unassailable. As they began to clean and salvage what they could, volunteers quietly took pictures, recorded statements, and documented every detail. Every act of destruction was captured, every hateful word preserved. The evidence of hate became evidence of resilience, proof that their work could withstand not only theft, but targeted racial intimidation. Terrence felt a surge of clarity. They weren't just defending code, they were defending the legitimacy of Black brilliance, in spaces designed to suppress it. This lab was no longer about RM Delta alone. It was a statement: brilliance, no matter the color of the skin or the job title, could not be erased. But even as Terrence and Isaiah organized recovery, a shadow loomed over the work. Whoever had attacked the lab once could do so again. The destruction was proof that they were being watched, that their enemies remained dangerous, and that public support, while powerful, could not entirely prevent targeted attacks. That night, Terrence returned to the devastated warehouse alone. As he stepped through the threshold, he froze. Across the floor, scrawled in jagged, dripping letters across the main lab wall, was a single message: "You were warned, Bray. This is just the beginning." All of the equipment lay in ruins. The lights flickered. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Terrence's heart pounded as the magnitude of the threat sank in. Somewhere in the darkness, he realized, this war for recognition and justice had only just begun. The morning after the attack, Terrence Bray stood in the wreckage of the lab, hands trembling slightly as he surveyed the damage. Equipment lay shattered, monitors smoked from short circuits, and the walls bore messages of hate and intimidation. The air smelled of burnt plastic, paint, and wet concrete. But instead of despair, determination sparked in his chest. Each broken circuit, each overturned desk, each racial slur painted across the walls became a testament, proof that the forces aligned against him feared what he and Isaiah were capable of achieving. Isaiah Knox placed a hand on his shoulder. "We don't rebuild to appease them," he said quietly. "We rebuild to show the world that brilliance isn't bound by fear. They thought they could break us. They only made us stronger." Terrence nodded, inhaling slowly. "Then we rebuild. Bigger, smarter, transparent, open source. This time, no one will erase us." Within days, they began rallying allies. The news of the attack, racial slurs, destroyed equipment, targeted intimidation, drew attention from former Black engineers, disillusioned graduate students, and even a few white whistleblowers who had quietly observed Maddox's manipulations, but feared retaliation. The core team expanded, growing from 2 to a dozen, then 20, each bringing expertise, insight, and an unspoken commitment to justice. They rebranded the initiative as Build Black Brilliance, a campaign that emphasized empowerment, transparency, and equity in tech research. The GoFundMe campaign was relaunched with the expanded mission statement. The story of resilience resonated widely. Donations poured in faster than ever, surpassing the previous campaign. Open source repositories were established, collaborative schedules were set, and a new lab space was secured. Larger, better equipped, and fortified against future attacks. The rebuilt lab thrummed with energy. Terrence and Isaiah coordinated research schedules, mentoring sessions, and code reviews. The whiteboards were filled with ideas, neural network designs, and pipelines for public release. Volunteers, many of whom had been sidelined or dismissed in traditional academia, worked late nights fueled by passion, rather than prestige. The hum of servers and laptops became the pulse of a movement, one born not of compromise, but of justice and brilliance denied for too long. One evening, Terrence sat with a young black engineer named Simone, reviewing predictive anomaly outputs from their latest neural network iteration. "You know," she said quietly, "it's not just the code, it's the message. We're proving that our work matters, that it can't be stolen, erased, or ignored." Terrence nodded, a rare faint smile forming. "That's the point," he said. "We're not just building technology, we're building a culture that refuses to forget us." Isaiah, monitoring multiple collaborative threads, interjected. "And the world is starting to notice. Media coverage is shifting. Articles are framing RM Delta as a turning point, not just a technical achievement, but a symbol of systemic correction." The recognition was bittersweet. Terrence appreciated the validation, but he remained cautious. The institutions that had ignored him for decades were still operating, still wielding influence, still capable of co-opting narratives for their own benefit. His caution was confirmed when an invitation arrived. Harvard University. Terrence had been asked to speak at a prominent AI and ethics symposium. The invitation was framed as recognition of his contributions and insight, but the phrasing felt carefully constructed, almost patronizing. "We would be honored to host Mr. Terrence Bray to discuss the future of adaptive AI and ethical practices in research." Terrence stared at the email, suspicion prickling at his mind. "They're presenting this as an honor," he muttered to Isaiah. "But they want to control the narrative. They'll use me as a token, not as a leader." Isaiah leaned back, eyes narrowed. "Then don't let them. Speak your truth. This is your platform. Their prestige doesn't own it." When the day arrived, the Harvard auditorium was packed. Students, faculty, journalists, and tech professionals filled the seats. Cameras lined the aisles, capturing the proceedings for both live broadcast and archival purposes. Terrence adjusted the microphone, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He scanned the crowd, eyes catching familiar journalists from previous coverage, and noted the mix of anticipation and skepticism. As he began to speak, his voice resonated with authority and clarity. He outlined the creation of RM Delta, the theft by Maddox, the systemic erasure of black innovators, and the philosophy behind Build Black Brilliance. Every word was measured, every slide precise. He spoke not only of technical specifications, but of moral responsibility, equity, and the consequences of silencing talent based on race and class. The audience was rapt. Phones and tablets recorded, notebooks filled. For the first time, Terrence felt the power of being heard, not dismissed, not invisible. But as he gestured toward a slide showing the collaborative, open-source framework for the new lab, a small detail in the program flashed on the main screen. A name appeared on the panel schedule as a special guest for the Q&A segment following his talk. Terrence's eyes narrowed. The name made his chest tighten. Paul Maddox. The room remained oblivious, murmuring quietly. Terrence's pulse quickened. Maddox's presence wasn't merely inconvenient. It was a deliberate tactic, a signal, a threat, and a reminder of the power structures that still sought to manipulate and undermine him. He stopped mid-sentence, letting silence fill the room. A whisper of tension traveled through the audience. Cameras panned toward the stage, capturing his hesitation. His throat tightened as anger, disbelief, and decades of memory surged forward. The stolen work, the humiliation, the erased efforts, the threats, the destruction of the Build Black Brilliance lab, all culminating in this moment. Isaiah, standing in the back row among the volunteers, recognized the tension immediately. He understood the unspoken decision Terrence faced. Speak on, risk direct confrontation in front of a prestigious audience, dominated by Maddox's supporters, or step back and reclaim control in a different way. Terrence's hands clenched the edges of the podium. He inhaled slowly, eyes sweeping over the crowd, over the screens, over the cameras recording every moment. The weight of the moment, the culmination of years of unseen effort, now pressed directly upon him. He could feel the anticipation in the room, the fragile curiosity of those present, some ready to cheer, some poised to doubt, and some waiting to see if he would falter under pressure. Then he made his decision. Without announcing it, He stepped away from the podium. A murmur rose from the audience. Journalists leaned forward. Students exchanged glances. Volunteers in the back row gasped quietly. Terrence moved past the stage lights, eyes fixed on the exit. He did not speak, did not explain, did not apologize. His departure itself was a statement. He would not perform for a system that tried to co-opt his voice, nor would he allow the past abuser to share his platform. The auditorium erupted into confusion. Whispers, shuffling chairs, and camera flashes created a dissonant soundscape. Journalists scrambled to understand why the speaker had left mid-speech. Live broadcasts captured the moment, sending it across social media within seconds. Backstage, Terrence paused, just beyond the curtain, breathing heavily. He allowed himself a moment to reflect on the magnitude of what had occurred. He had spoken truth. He had built a movement. He had reclaimed his agency. But the presence of Maddox, even in the periphery, reminded him that the battle was far from over. The systems that sought to erase him still existed, still wielded influence, still attempted to control narratives. Isaiah joined him moments later, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "Leaving was part of reclaiming your authority. You're not here to validate them. You're here to lead your people, your movement, and your truth." Terrence nodded, feeling the heavy lift of decades of injustice finally balanced by a profound sense of purpose. The lab, the volunteers, the open source project, they were no longer just symbols. They were active instruments of change, and the world for the first time could not ignore them. Yet even in this victory, a shadow lingered. Maddox had not been neutralized. His influence remained, and the possibility of retaliation, co-option, or sabotage loomed. The fight for recognition, equity, and justice was far from over. Terrence knew that every step forward would be met with resistance, but now he had allies, momentum, and the undeniable truth on his side. He allowed himself one long exhale, then turned toward the city beyond the stage, feeling the weight of history, hope, and responsibility pressing simultaneously against his chest. As Terrence stepped away from the Harvard stage, moving past the final rows of seats, he glimpsed Maddox sitting calmly in the designated panel area, smiling faintly, as if anticipating his every move. Terrence's stomach twisted with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The panel discussion had not yet begun. Maddox was officially listed as a participant. Terrence stopped mid-step, frozen in realization. Every instinct told him this was not coincidence. This was deliberate. Every eye in the auditorium, every camera lens, and every member of the panel now had the potential to amplify Maddox's influence, or undermine Terrence's voice. He whispered under his breath, barely audible, "They never stop." The courthouse smelled of polished wood, linoleum floors, and the faint tang of nervous sweat. Terrence Bray walked through the double doors with measured steps, hands gripping the strap of a simple messenger bag that carried only his notes and a folder of exhibits. He had been here before, technically, during administrative hearings and informal inquiries, but this was different. This was public, legal, and binding. This was the trial of Paul Maddox. The courtroom was packed. Journalists jostled for position, cameras perched on tripods, microphones extended toward anyone who might speak. Volunteers from Build Black Brilliance and former students filled rows, faces tense with anticipation. The air was thick, expectant. Every eye seemed to measure Terrence not just as a witness, but as a symbol of years of suppressed brilliance and stolen recognition. At the front, Maddox sat stoic, wearing a tailored gray suit, his hands folded neatly on the table. His jaw was tight. He had rehearsed his defense endlessly. The misunderstanding, the coincidental alignment of research, the institutional oversight. But in his eyes flickered the first signs of fear. He knew now that Terrence's testimony would unravel everything he had constructed over decades. When the judge called the court to order, Terrence stepped forward. He had prepared his statement meticulously, yet he felt the weight of every stolen idea, every humiliation, every year of invisibility pressing on his chest. He was nervous, not of the legal process, but of recounting decades of systematic erasure, and of holding back nothing in the presence of the world. The prosecutor began, outlining the charges: intellectual property theft, deliberate misappropriation of student research, and patterns of systemic exploitation targeting Black innovators. The courtroom listened attentively, the gravity of decades of injustice condensed into a succinct, damning indictment. Then Terrence took the stand. He cleared his throat, glancing first at the jury, then at Maddox, the man who had once sneered at him publicly. mocked his existence, and claimed credit for his work, now sat silent, a figure of constrained composure. Terrence began slowly, voice steady, though tinged with emotion. "I was a janitor at Denton Tech University," he said. "For years I walked the halls, unnoticed. I cleaned the floors that others cared nothing about. And all the while I built. I listened. I coded. I designed models, work that would later be claimed as someone else's." The courtroom was silent. Cameras panned across the audience. Some leaned forward, eyes wide. Others whispered to neighbors, absorbing the unfolding narrative. Terrence's words had weight because they were lived, not fabricated. He continued, detailing his early work on RM Delta, the countless nights spent refining code, debugging neural network layers, and running simulations in a basement no one would have considered a laboratory. He described the moment Maddox publicly mocked him, dismissing him as no scientist, demanding he fetch coffee, as the world watched. A flashback gripped him. The image of the lecture hall, students laughing, professors sneering, the sting of humiliation seared into memory. Tears welled, but he fought them back. "I could have given up," he said, voice low, "but I didn't, because brilliance isn't defined by who applauds it, or who claims it. It exists regardless." The jury, a mix of young professionals, retirees, and academics, listened intently. Some scribbled notes, others simply leaned back, absorbing the human story behind the legal facts. Terrence's testimony was more than technical explanation. It was a moral reckoning, a call to witness the systemic erasure that had accompanied stolen innovation. He detailed every stolen manuscript, every denied co-authorship, every manipulated grade, and every stolen experiment. He referenced internal memos, email threads, and recordings provided by Molly Hayes and corroborated by Isaiah Knox. Each exhibit was shown, timestamped, and validated. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as Terrence recounted, with precision and clarity, the history of professional theft and personal humiliation. Maddox's defense tried to argue coincidence and procedural oversight, claiming that Terrence's access to lab equipment was incidental, and that similarities in code could be explained by overlapping research interests. But every rebuttal was met with evidence Terrence had meticulously preserved, commits predating Maddox's public presentations, email chains demonstrating deliberate copying, and witness statements attesting to his exclusive contribution. At one point Terrence's hands trembled slightly as he held up the original notebook, pages filled with handwritten notes, calculations, and diagrams, the physical manifestation of years of unseen labor. He placed it carefully on the evidence stand. "This," he said, voice firm, "is not theory. This is the work I built, and it was stolen, every step of the way." The courtroom remained hushed. Maddox's lawyers whispered among themselves, glancing nervously at their client, who avoided Terrence's gaze. The jury shifted in their seats. Every exhibit added weight to Terrence's testimony, and every word he spoke painted a broader picture of systemic exploitation. By the third day, the prosecution presented testimony from former students, lab assistants, and volunteer witnesses. Each one confirmed Terrence's accounts, revealing decades of patterns. Black students discouraged from publishing, co-authorship denied, and careers sabotaged. The narrative was damning. Maddox's network of influence, carefully cultivated over years, began to unravel in real time. Despite the weight of evidence, the tension in the courtroom remained palpable. Terrence felt the heavy balance between vindication and systemic inertia. Justice, he realized, was not guaranteed even with proof. Yet the act of speaking, of making visible what had long been erased, carried a power that transcended legal outcomes. Finally, closing arguments were made. The prosecution outlined the cumulative pattern of theft and exploitation. The defense attempted one last appeal to Maddox's perceived reputation and stature, but the evidence was irrefutable. The jury retired to deliberate. Terrence sat exhausted, heart racing, mind replaying each moment he had recounted, each humiliation reclaimed in testimony. Hours passed. Reporters filed updates outside the courthouse. Social media buzzed with speculation, and the air inside grew taut with anticipation. When the jury returned, silence fell over the room. The foreperson stood. "On the charges presented," she began, "we find the defendant." The word guilty hung in the air. A collective breath seemed to echo through the courtroom. Terrence's shoulders slumped slightly, the tension releasing in a quiet private exhale. But that relief was fleeting. The judge's sentence followed: probation, community service, and a nominal fine. Maddox avoided prison time, his public reputation somewhat tarnished, but his personal freedom intact. The courtroom was silent. Journalists scribbled furiously. Witnesses exchanged stunned glances. The disparity between moral victory and legal punishment was striking. Terrence stared, chest tight. Guilty. Yes. But justice? Not entirely. He felt the familiar sting of invisibility, the reminder that societal structures often acknowledged wrongdoing without enforcing meaningful consequence. It was victory on paper, but the deeper systems of privilege remained intact. As the courtroom slowly emptied, a juror approached Terrence. She was a woman in her mid-40s, eyes bright but solemn. Clutching a small folded note, she handed it to him discreetly. Terrence unfolded it, eyes scanning the words. The real sentence is obscurity. You're already immortal. He froze, the weight of the statement pressing into him. It was both a warning and a comfort, a recognition that the world could attempt to minimize his contributions, but that the truth of his brilliance, the evidence, the story, the movement he had catalyzed, could not be erased. The juror disappeared into the crowd, leaving Terrence standing in a hallway that suddenly felt vast, quiet, and filled with possibility. The public victory was incomplete, the punishment insufficient, but his legacy was undeniable. His code, his story, and the community he had fostered existed beyond the reach of any institutional injustice. Terrence folded the note carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. He understood fully. Vindication was not justice in the strictest sense. Legal systems could provide formal acknowledgement, but true justice, the systemic acknowledgement and elevation of erased brilliance, would require continued struggle. Isaiah arrived, moments later, placing a hand on Terrence's shoulder. They tried to bury you, he said softly. They tried to erase your work, silence your story, and intimidate the witnesses. But you're here, and the world knows it. Terrence nodded slowly.
Guilty, yes.
But probation, it feels like a hollow sentence for what he did. And yet, the truth is out. Isaiah's gaze was steady. Truth has a weight all its own, and it lasts far longer than fear or privilege. You're not invisible anymore. Not ever again. Terrence took a deep breath, letting the words settle in. Every stolen idea reclaimed through testimony, every witness who came forward, every document revealed. These were victories independent of legal decree. The world, the broader culture, was finally seeing what had always existed. His mind, his dedication, his brilliance. Yet even as he left the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and camera flashes, he knew the work was not done. The system that allowed theft, marginalization, and erasure to flourish remained. Recognition could illuminate some corners, but others would still remain hidden. And so the fight continued. Beyond the courtroom, beyond headlines, into every space where innovation was at risk of being silenced by bias. For now, Terrence carried a new understanding. Vindication alone could not right the past, nor could it ensure the protection of future innovators. But it was a start, a beginning that could not be taken away, a seed from which a movement could grow, a testimony that no institution could ignore indefinitely. And as he pocketed the juror's note, Terrence felt the quiet, powerful truth settle deep inside him. Immortality was not in fame or titles, but in the act of having lived and created beyond the constraints imposed by those who sought to diminish him. Terrence Bray stood in the sunlight streaming through the glass walls of the new institute, the first fully black-run AI research facility in the United States. It was a building unlike any he had seen, sleek, modern, and open, with communal workspaces, classrooms, and laboratories designed not to intimidate, but to inspire. The walls were lined with whiteboards, code snippets, and inspirational quotes, highlighting Black innovators who had been erased from history. For the first time, Terrence could look around and see his vision realized, a place where brilliance would not be ignored because of skin color, socioeconomic status, or job title. He walked slowly through the main lab, hands brushing the edges of sleek desks and monitors humming softly with code. Volunteers and full-time researchers worked quietly, immersed in experiments, simulations, and algorithm refinement. The energy in the room was different from any lab he had ever known. There was no hierarchy rooted in privilege, no fear of dismissal or theft. Here the work spoke for itself, and every mind mattered equally. Isaiah Knox approached him, holding a tablet filled with the week's enrollment and research updates. "Terrence," he said quietly, awe tinged in his voice. "Look at this. We have over 100 applicants for our summer program already, And that's just inner-city youth. Formerly incarcerated coders are applying for scholarships. People are lining up to be part of this. You've done something no one thought possible. Terrence nodded, swallowing hard. It's bigger than I imagined, he said. I didn't just want a lab. I wanted a legacy. A place where talent can't be stolen. Where potential isn't erased. And it's happening. The first summer camp for inner-city youth began that week. Children and teenagers from neighborhoods long neglected by educational institutions streamed into the facility, eyes wide with excitement and wonder. They learned programming, algorithm design, and basic AI concepts. Terrence moved among them, demonstrating concepts, guiding experiments, and sharing his story in carefully measured detail. He didn't sugarcoat the hardships, the theft, the humiliation, but he emphasized resilience, perseverance, and the importance of believing in one's own abilities, even when the world refuses to acknowledge them. One young girl named Maya approached him after a robotics demonstration, holding a small, hand-coded prototype she had built overnight. I want to build AI that helps people like me, she said quietly. I want to be the one who isn't erased. Terrence smiled, a rare, soft expression breaking through the decades of tension that had gripped him. Then you will be, he said, and you'll teach others to do the same. That's how we change the world, one mind at a time. Meanwhile, formerly incarcerated coders arrived, hesitant at first but quickly immersing themselves in the work. Scholarships allowed them access to tools, mentorship, and a safe environment to rebuild not only their skills but also their lives. For some, it was a second chance. For Terrence, it was the embodiment of everything he had fought for: inclusion, equity, and the opportunity to contribute without fear of erasure. The movement quickly gained traction. News outlets, previously skeptical or dismissive, began covering the institute as a beacon of innovation and social justice. Articles emphasized the open-source model, the empowerment of Black youth and marginalized coders, and Terrence's journey from janitor to visionary leader. Social media amplified the message, and the hashtag Black Brilliance trended for weeks. Despite the acclaim, Terrence felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. Every decision carried consequence. Every funding choice, curriculum plan, and research initiative required scrutiny. He declined private investors, rejecting the allure of fast money in favor of maintaining the integrity of the institute. Education, accessibility, and ethical AI development took precedence over profit. The mantra of the institute, transparency, equity, and empowerment, had to remain uncorrupted, no matter how tempting external offers became. Even so, fame brought pressure. Invitations to speak at conferences, panels, and media outlets multiplied, stretching Terrence thin. Each appearance reminded him of how far he had come, yet also how much more work remained. Volunteers and allies were committed, but the burden of leadership, of being the face of a movement born from decades of erasure, rested heavily on him. Late nights were spent reviewing applications, mentoring researchers, and ensuring that the institute's labs and programs ran smoothly. Terrence's eyes grew tired, his body aching from the relentless pace, but his mind remained sharp. He knew the institute's work was bigger than him, bigger than the accolades or attention. Every life impacted, every coder empowered, every youth inspired. It was tangible evidence that brilliance could not be confined by systemic prejudice. Yet just as Terrence began to feel the fragile relief of forward momentum, the past intruded unexpectedly. A quiet ping in his email inbox caught his attention one evening. The subject line was terse, private, MIT admission. He opened it cautiously. The message came from a former MIT dean, who had since retired. The email was concise but shocking. Terrence had been quietly admitted to MIT 15 years prior, under a special initiative for talented underrepresented students. The dean claimed that the acceptance had been confidential. But more importantly, Terrence had been expelled without ever being notified. Records had been mismanaged, hidden, and then quietly erased from official archives. No explanation, no appeal, no acknowledgement. Terrence's chest tightened. The revelation hit him like a punch. All the doors he thought had been closed by chance, all the paths he assumed had been blocked by circumstance, had in fact been intentionally severed. The very institution that could have launched him into academic prominence had silently erased him, leaving him to navigate decades of systemic exclusion, without the tools, resources, or validation that had been rightfully his. Isaiah leaned over, reading the email over his shoulder. "They expelled you without telling you," he said quietly, disbelief evident in his tone. That explains so much. The early rejections, the erasure, the constant pushback. They didn't just fail to see your brilliance. They actively suppressed it. Terrence swallowed hard, voice tight. All those years I thought I was alone. That it was just bad luck or prejudice here and there. But this was intentional, deliberate. The weight of the revelation pressed on him. Memories of rejection letters, dismissive professors, erased research, and stolen credit all converged into a stark, undeniable pattern. 15 years of systemic obstruction, carefully orchestrated, came into sharp relief. But Terrence did not falter. The institute, the students, the volunteers, and the open-source projects were his proof that he could reclaim agency, even when the system tried to erase him. The knowledge of MIT's betrayal ignited a new resolve. The institute would not just survive, it would thrive. It would stand as a testament to every erased mind, every overlooked coder, every silenced innovator. Even as he absorbed the news, a broader sense of urgency settled in. Terrence understood that fame and recognition came with scrutiny. Now past institutional betrayals could resurface at any time, potentially threatening the credibility of the institute or the safety of its participants. He resolved to document, archive, and preserve every record meticulously, ensuring that future attempts to erase, undermine, or delegitimize their work would fail. That evening, as he walked through the lab, observing students experimenting, coding, and collaborating, Terrence felt a renewed sense of purpose. Each desk, each screen, each young mind represented not only progress in AI research, but a reclamation of justice. The institute was more than a building, it was a movement, a statement, and a legacy. Terrence paused at a whiteboard filled with annotated diagrams and open-source workflow charts. He traced the lines with his finger, thinking of the countless innovators whose contributions had been stolen or ignored. The institute would honor them, empower them, and amplify them. For the first time, he felt a tangible sense of permanence. His work, and the work of those he mentored, could not be erased. Yet even with this determination, the email from MIT lingered in his mind, a ghost of systemic injustice that had shadowed his life. It was a reminder that while he had reclaimed his agency, the past could still emerge to challenge or complicate his progress. Every victory, no matter how complete it seemed, came with the potential for disruption. Terrence exhaled slowly, shoulders settling. "We keep building," he whispered to himself. "No matter what comes, we build." As he closed his laptop that evening, another notification appeared. A direct message from the former MIT dean. "Terrence, we need to speak. You were admitted quietly, 15 years ago. Expelled without notice. Records erased. Some of your earliest research still exists in our archives. Come to Cambridge. It's time the truth is fully acknowledged." Terrence's heart raced. The revelation threatened to reopen wounds. He thought he had turned into fuel for the institute. Yet a spark of curiosity and defiance ignited within him. He knew the path forward would confront him with the very institutions that tried to erase him. But he also understood that knowledge was power. He whispered under his breath, eyes narrowing, "They thought they could bury me, but the truth is unstoppable." The morning air at MIT carried a crispness that made Terrence Bray's lungs expand fully, a clarity he hadn't felt in decades. He walked across the quads, cameras rolling from multiple angles, journalists, volunteers from Build Black Brilliance, and documentary crews capturing every step. For the first time, he was returning to the institution that had silently admitted him 15 years prior, then erased his existence without notice. Yet the weight of past humiliation did not crush him. It fueled him. Every step was deliberate, measured, purposeful. He had reclaimed agency, visibility, and power. The campus seemed quiet, almost reverent, as if anticipating the confrontation with history itself. The students hurried between buildings, unaware of the storm of emotion their paths intersected. Terrence's eyes swept over the familiar structures, the lecture halls, the libraries, the labs, places that once symbolized possibility, now marked by the weight of exclusion. Memories flashed, the acceptance letter never received, the mysterious expulsion, the years of erased recognition. Each image pressed against him, yet instead of bitterness, a fierce resolve filled his chest. Isaiah Knox walked beside him, camera operators following, the sound of rolling lenses and quiet whispers blending into a rhythmic backdrop. "You ready?" Isaiah asked softly, glancing at Terrence with a mix of anticipation and concern. "This is more than a statement. It's a declaration." Terrence nodded, jaw tight. "I'm ready. Not for them, for everyone they tried to erase, for all the minds they tried to bury. They approached the building that had once been central to his erasure, a lecture hall adorned with plaques commemorating prestigious graduates. Yet conspicuously absent of anyone like him, Terrence stopped at the entrance, hand hovering over the wall. The polished stone was cold beneath his fingers, impersonal, sterile, and yet it beckoned. Cameras clicked, capturing the tension, the weight of decades compressed into a single cinematic moment. He knelt slightly, producing a piece of chalk. The sound of it scratching against stone echoed in the quiet courtyard, reverberating as though the very walls were listening. He wrote carefully, deliberately, each letter a testament to existence reclaimed.
Terrence Bray.
The crowd, reporters, volunteers, and students gathered discreetly, gasped collectively. The camera zoomed in on the inscription, the weight of decades of invisibility now made literal, indelible on the campus that had once refused him acknowledgement. He straightened, letting the moment linger. It wasn't a declaration of vengeance. It wasn't a demand for attention. It was an assertion of fact. He existed, he had created, he had persevered, and he would not be erased again. The wind stirred the leaves of the quad, carrying a whisper through the trees, as though even the institution itself had to acknowledge his presence. A senior MIT administrator approached cautiously, extending a small formal envelope. "Mr. Bray," she said carefully, "on behalf of the institute, we would like to offer you an honorary doctorate in recognition of your contributions to AI and open source research." Terrence took the envelope, eyes narrowing slightly. He glanced at Isaiah, who offered a subtle nod of encouragement. Terrence's hands remained steady, and he allowed himself a slow, deliberate exhale. "Thank you," he said quietly, "but I will decline. I don't need validation from the same system that erased me. I have already rewritten the rules. Recognition from them does not define my worth or my impact." The administrator blinked, then nodded slowly. "Understood. But know that your work is respected, and will be preserved in our archives." Terrence allowed a faint smile. Preservation is not enough. Action, empowerment, and equity, that is what matters. That is what ensures the future will be different. He turned from the building and gestured to the cameras, and the volunteers gathered around. This is not about one person, one institution, or one achievement. It's about a system that too often silences brilliance and erases contribution. Today we show that the system can be challenged, that talent is not bound by privilege, and that the work of the overlooked matters as much as the work of the celebrated. Isaiah raised the GoPro to record the moment, from above. The students and volunteers clapped quietly, the weight of reverence and recognition settling over the crowd. The moment was cinematic, a visual metaphor for reclamation, for resilience, and for power asserted where it had been denied. For Terrence, the act was symbolic but real. The chalk-stained letters on the wall were visible to anyone who passed the quad. His story, his name, his existence were immortalized in physical space. No administrative oversight, no institutional power could erase it now. As the group dispersed, Terrence led a small tour of the quad and surrounding labs for visiting youth, scholars, and formerly marginalized coders who had joined Build Black Brilliance. He explained algorithms, open source principles, and the ethics of AI. He emphasized community, mentorship, and the responsibility of those who created technology to ensure it empowered others rather than silenced them. Later that evening, after the cameras had packed up and volunteers had gone home, Terrence sat in the quiet of a small lecture hall, the sun setting across the campus, casting long shadows through the windows. Isaiah joined him, settling into the seat beside him. "They've tried everything," Isaiah said softly, voice low. "Erasure, theft, intimidation, discrediting your work. Yet here you are. You're building a movement that can't be stopped." Terrence's eyes reflected the amber glow of the setting sun. "Yes, but with visibility comes responsibility," he said. "Every student we mentor, every coder we empower, every initiative we launch, it's not just about me anymore. It's about creating a system where brilliance isn't hidden, where Black innovators, overlooked researchers, and marginalized talent aren't left to fight alone. We have to make sure history doesn't repeat itself." Isaiah nodded. "And you've done that. You've created a blueprint for how to reclaim power, even when the system resists." Terrence allowed himself a long breath. He thought of the journey, the humiliation in lecture halls, the stolen research, the attacks on his lab, the viral moments, the court case, and the institute now alive with energy, purpose, and hope. Every obstacle had carved him into the leader he had become, but the work was far from over. As he looked out the window at the quiet campus, a final thought settled over him. This moment wasn't for fame, not for validation, not for glory. It was for responsibility. The brilliance that had been ignored, suppressed, and stolen would now have a chance to thrive, and he would ensure that opportunity reached those who had historically been denied it. Yet even in triumph, Terrence remained vigilant. Fame, visibility, and influence came with risk. Institutions could still attempt co-option. The system could still retaliate. But he had allies, proof, and an enduring network of talent that could not be erased. For the first time, he felt the power of permanence, not through titles or degrees, but through impact, community, and unassailable truth. Unexpected twist. Weeks later, Terrence spoke at a Black Tech Expo, the largest gathering of Black engineers, programmers, and tech innovators in the nation. He addressed the crowd, sharing insights from Build Black Brilliance, ethical AI, and mentorship initiatives. His voice was steady, commanding, yet warm. He emphasized responsibility over recognition, knowledge over fame, and community over hierarchy. The audience was enraptured, nodding, applauding, and taking notes. Young coders lined the aisles, eager to learn, to engage, to connect with a man who had defied systemic erasure. The energy was palpable. Excitement, admiration, and inspiration interwoven in every gesture and word. As Terrence finished a technical explanation of neural network optimization, a sudden movement in the back of the auditorium caught his eye. A young janitor, dressed plainly in dark overalls, slowly rose, clutching a worn note. The young man's hands shook slightly, but determination was evident in his stance. Terrence froze, heart tightening. The notebook peeking from the janitor's bag was filled with formulas, complex, original, and clearly unrefined, yet brilliant. The handwriting was small, meticulous, almost obsessive. It was clear this young man had been working in secret, just as Terrence had once done years ago. The crowd murmured, some noticing the gesture, others puzzled. The janitor's eyes met Terrence's, and in that instant, a silent understanding passed between them. The cycle of brilliance, suppression, and potential recognition was repeating itself. The room seemed to quiet, the energy shifting from celebration to anticipation. Terrence felt the weight of the moment. He recognized himself in the young man's posture, in the determination, in the fear of being unseen, and he understood the fight was not over. The responsibility to nurture, to empower, and to protect those who were overlooked was now bigger than him. It extended beyond personal vindication, beyond a single institute, beyond a single generation. He took a slow breath and raised his hand slightly, inviting the young janitor forward. Cameras shifted. The audience leaned in. Terrence's voice cut through the murmurs, steady and deliberate. This, he said softly, yet with undeniable authority, is why we build. Brilliance exists everywhere, and it will be seen. The janitor hesitated, notebook clutched tightly, as Terrence's gaze met his. The room held its collective breath, the moment suspended, a testament to resilience, mentorship, and the enduring fight against erasure. In that instant, Terrence realized the legacy he had created was no longer about himself. It was about a movement, a culture, a chain of mentorship and empowerment that could never be fully destroyed. He had become the beginning, not the exception. And yet, the story was not finished. The notebook in the janitor's hands, the formulas inside, and the potential they represented carried the weight of what was possible, and of what the system might still try to suppress. The young janitor's notebook opened slowly, revealing a single formula on the first page, a complex neural architecture with annotations that mirrored a brilliance Terrence recognized instantly. He whispered under his breath, eyes widening, "They never learn, and neither will we." The camera panned across the auditorium, capturing every astonished face. Terrence smiled faintly, realizing the torch was about to be passed, and that the next chapter of Black Brilliance was already in motion. Brilliance should never be silenced. Every stolen idea, every erased voice matters, and it's on us to see the truth and stand for it. If this story moved you, type yes if you believe.